FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 251, Lassie's blood test results and the suspect. A private hospital in Manhattan, New York. This hospital often receives well-known wealthy people and politicians from all walks of life in the New York area, so it is very private. In a VIP reception room, Luo An and Lassie are waiting for the results of the blood test. Luo An's expression was still calm. He had not come into contact with many women since he came to this world. He came here for a blood test today just in case and to reassure himself. But Lassie, who was beside him, had sweat all over her forehead and was fidgeting. Not only because Lassie had come into contact with too many women, but also because she and Luo An had returned to the 5th investigation team with a folder. When they carefully checked every HIV carrier in the car, they accidentally found that she had seen one of the women. That woman was also a lesbian. Although Lassie had never had sex with her, she had hunted for sex with her in the same bar. Bars are a mixed bag of people, and who knows if her fingers have walked through the same passage as the other person. Thinking of this, Lassie's face became paler and paler. Calm down, Lassie. Seeing the expression on Lassie's face, Roan quickly got up and poured her a cup of coffee. He was a little worried that Lassie would be scared to death by her own wild thoughts before the blood test results came out. Thank you. Lassie took a sip of the coffee, took a few deep breaths, and slowly calmed down her emotions. After a few seconds of silence, Lassie smiled bitterly. Roan, I'm afraid I know why the murderer killed Flavia. If the doctor opens the door and walks in later and says that my test is positive, to be honest, I also want to kill that doctor. Roan was a little speechless, but he was also waiting for the test results at this time. It was not difficult to understand Lassie's psychology by simply putting it in his shoes. Seeing that there was still some time before the test results came out, Luo An thought for a while and started chatting with Lassie to divert her attention. Lassie, I feel that your result is likely to be negative. If that's the case, what are you going to do in the future? Lassie was slightly stunned. After thinking for a while, she realized that Luo An's words meant to persuade her to play less in the future, but she immediately shook her head. It's okay, Luo An. I can wear a protective condom like you men in the future. Luo An's face rose. What's the point of wearing a protective condom when you play with your fingers? The picture was so beautiful that Luo An didn't dare to think about it. Just as he was about to continue talking, Lassie suddenly asked, Luo An, you and Mona are already living together, right? Yes. Luo An nodded, and then thought that Lassie was asking him whether he would tell Mona about this later, so he replied, don't worry, I will take care of it. After getting Luo An's affirmative answer, Lassie couldn't help but mutter a few words in a low voice. She had originally planned to rent an apartment with Mona outside when she went to Los Angeles later. Now it seems that this idea is bankrupt. Boom. Boom. Dang. After a while, the door of the reception room was knocked, and then a doctor came in. After receiving the test report and seeing that there was no problem with his blood, Luo An was relieved. Just as he was about to turn around, Lassie rushed over from the side and hugged Luo An's arm, shouting excitedly, great. I'm fine. I'm fine. Lassie jumped on the spot, and her whole state was similar to that of someone in the East who had passed the imperial examination. Luo An did not stop her. He was scared just now, and it would be good to vent his emotions now. You keep pinching my arm. After a few seconds, Luo An shook his arm. My sleeve is about to be torn by you. Lassie quickly let go of Luo An and said, sorry, I'm too excited. Lassie was emotional, picked up the coffee on the table, and drank it all in one gulp. The first time I pulled a woman to my bed, I was not as excited as today. There were a lot of complaints about Lassie's words, but Luo An did not complain, because he discovered another thing. Lassie, let me ask you a question. Roan did not leave in a hurry. He pondered for a few seconds, looked up at Lassie, and asked, if the blood test result you just got is positive, you must be very curious about who infected you with HIV, right? Of course. Lassie nodded, and then seeing the expression on Roan's face, she suddenly realized, you mean, the murderer who killed Flavia would also be very curious about this. Right. This is completely human nature. And Roan also thought of another point, that is, the murderer killed Flavia who told the murderer about AIDS. So what about the guy who infected the murderer with HIV? Will the murderer let him go? It is very likely that there is another dead person. After listening to Roan's analysis, Lassie clapped her hands and continued, and this dead person may be in those folders. Right. Roan immediately took Lassie out of the hospital and drove the sub back to the Jacob Federal Building. At the same time, he told William and others about this analysis through his mobile phone. Okay, we'll check right away to see if there's anyone else dead. William on the other end of the phone agreed and then said, in addition, we just found out that the phone in Flavia's office is actually equipped with a caller ID, which can record communication records. According to the communication records, we found a guy who not only insulted Flavia, but also said he would kill her with a knife, and poked several holes in Flavia's chest. It's consistent with how Flavia died. Luo An's expression did not change, but the insults were all similar. The other party couldn't say to press Flavia's legs when threatening people. And William couldn't have told him about this, just based on this sentence. So Luo An asked, did you find anything else? Yes. This time the voice on the other end of the phone was Mona. We found the identity of the man, based on the phone call. His name is Daryl Roger. He was imprisoned for sexual assault, illegal possession of a gun, intimidation, first-degree assault, etc. He was released on parole 4 months ago, but he never reported to the parole officer. The agents from the trace examination department scanned all the threatening letters and found a large number of Daryl's fingerprints in the text of one of the letters and other places, which can prove that this letter was written by him. Wow. Lassie in the passenger seat raised her eyebrows. This guy's really a talent. Luo An, who was driving, glanced at her. It seemed that her usual energy returned after the blood was fine. After thinking for a while, Luo An asked, can you find out where this Daryl is now? Of course. Mona told Luo An the other party's address. Luo An nodded, turned the steering wheel and drove the sub in another direction. Daryl Roger is a bald, beardless middle-aged white man who looks quite plump. He works in a small food factory in Brooklyn, New York. When Roan and Lassie arrived, Daryl Roger was unloading flour from a car with 2 people. After parking the sub on the side of the road, Lassie walked in that direction and shouted, Daryl Roger, we have something to ask you. The next second, Lassie's pupils shrank, because Daryl Roger looked up at her and Roan, and without hesitation, he took out a pistol from his pocket. Chapter 250 to Flowerface. Brooklyn, outside a small food workshop. Fouquet. Seeing the pistol in Daryl Roger's hand, Lassie's pupils shrank, and she cursed loudly. She subconsciously dodged backwards, preparing to hide behind obstacles, to avoid the opponent's bullets. Bang, bang. The next second, Lassie suddenly heard 2 gunshots. However, these 2 sounds came from behind her. Then, a man's scream came from in front of Lassie. Lassie turned around and found that Daryl Roger had fallen off the car at this time. Blood kept flowing from his right hand, staining a large area of flour that fell on the ground red. Lassie subconsciously turned her head to look at Roan. Sure enough, Roan was slowly putting away the Glock 18. Seeing Lassie looking at him, Roan slightly raised the corner of his mouth and smiled at her. Roan had already taken out the pistol when he got off the car just now. The moment Daryl Roger took out the pistol and aimed at himself and Lassie, he pulled the trigger directly. With her thighs one in front of the other and her body bent forward, Lassie's mouth twitched as she looked a little indecent and awkward. For some reason, Lassie felt that Roan did it on purpose. He walked past Lassie and patted her on the shoulder. Roan walked slowly to Daryl Roger's side and kicked the pistol that fell on the ground in front of Lassie. Then he smiled and said, congratulations, Daryl Roger, you are going to prison for further studies again. Pa. Daryl Roger's beardless and hairless face suddenly showed a ferocious look when he heard it, and he spat thick phlegm at Roan fiercely. But Roan easily blocked it with a broken flour bag. Not only that, Roan also threw the flour bag back to Daryl Roger's face. Daryl Roger, whose face was covered with his own phlegm and flour, became even more angry. He struggled frantically, but there was nothing he could do because Lassie had already taken out handcuffs and handcuffed his hands. In addition, because she was worried that Daryl Roger would spit again, Lassie did not take off the flour bag on his head and stuffed Daryl Roger into the SUV. So after the hospital treated Daryl Roger's wrist gunshot wound, everyone in the Jacob Federal building saw Lassie and Roan escorting a guy who was doing performance art back to the number 5 investigation team. Daryl Roger. In the interrogation room, Roan took off the flour bag on Daryl Roger's head. The sudden light made Daryl Roger narrow his eyes slightly. After seeing Roan and Lassie in front of him, he subconsciously wanted to continue spitting. Roan saw the other party's action and smiled, shaking the flour bag in his hand. Think clearly before spitting. Daryl Roger's face froze when he saw this. Should he swallow it back? Daryl Roger slowly calmed down. Lassie opened the folder in her hand and began to count all the crimes he committed over the years. Sexual assault, illegal possession of firearms, intimidation, first-degree assault. Now there's arrest and assault on federal agents. Closing the folder, Lassie said expressionlessly, "Daryl, how is your life recently? Are you still threatening and forcing women to sleep with you?" "No, since I have money, I have plenty of women to fuck." Daryl Roger sneered, then made a gesture to Roan. "Man, your partner may need to be fucked." As a person who has lived in prison for a long time, Daryl's dirty words and swear words are endless. Roan was too lazy to pay attention to him and said directly, "You don't like women like my partner? Is it because she threatens you, right? Just like Flavia Fran. That's a nosy bitch." Hearing the name Flavia from Roan's mouth, Daryl's face was immediately filled with anger. He knocked on the table hard and said angrily, "She actually wanted to tell those girls that I was infected with HIV. Not only did she tell them, but that bitch also planned to tell my boss and colleagues at work. Damn, do you know how hard it is for me to find a job?" Roan nodded and continued Daryl's words. "So in order to protect your job, you killed Flavia Fran, right?" "I didn't kill anyone. You damn FBI. Asterisk asterisk asterisk." Daryl was very angry when he heard this and began to curse wildly. Roan leaned back and calmly hugged his shoulders. "If you didn't kill anyone, why did you pull out your gun without hesitation when we found you?" Hearing this, Daryl Roger fell silent instantly. "Are you still going to hide it?" Lassie sneered and threw the folder in her hand fiercely on the interrogation table. "We have sent people to search your home and your warehouse. I hope it is cleaner there than your mouth." Okay. Daryl was silent for a few seconds and raised his hands, saying that he just shot because he thought that the little leaves he hid in the basement were discovered, and he did it because he was afraid of being impulsive. "But I really didn't kill Flavia Flan." After listening to Daryl's narration, Roan gave Lassie a look. Lassie nodded and left the interrogation room. She took out her mobile phone and called Ryder, who went to Daryl's house to search, asking him to focus on searching the basement. "I accept your explanation for the time being." After Lassie left the interrogation room, Roan chuckled and continued to look at Daryl Roger and asked, "But you are still guilty of attacking federal agents, so in order to mitigate your own guilt, do you have any clues to provide about the murder of Flavia last night?" Daryl Roger, who went in and out of prison as if it were a common occurrence, had become a doctor after a long illness. At this time, he was very familiar with some federal laws, such as using clues in exchange for a reduced sentence. After thinking seriously for a moment, Daryl suddenly raised his head. After getting Roan's affirmative answer, he said something. "This morning, when I left home to go to work, I found someone following me with a notebook. I wanted to catch that guy and teach him a lesson, but that guy was riding a bicycle and I didn't catch up." Roan narrowed his eyes when he heard this. "What color is the notebook in that guy's hand?" "I don't know. I didn't see it clearly." Daryl Roger shrugged. "But the bicycle that guy rides looks good. You can check the surveillance video of that area if there are surveillance cameras." After leaving the interrogation room and Roan just walked to his workstation, Lassie responded with a mobile phone. Grinning, Ryder found a whole cabinet of bagged large sizes in the basement of Daryl Roger's house. Daryl obviously wants to make a fortune with these things. Unfortunately, Daryl can't make a fortune. Roan didn't care about the large sizes. he replied casually, and then asked Mona and William to retrieve the surveillance records of the area mentioned by Daryl. Lassie, who was watching this scene nearby, rested her chin on one hand, looked at Mona typing on the keyboard with a puzzled look on her face, and asked, "Roan, if the guy who followed Daryl was the murderer of Flavia, then why did he follow Daryl? This doesn't make sense." Chapter 253 HIV Carrier 0. Luo An was a little confused about this question at first, but when he put the other party's thoughts into context, he roughly guessed what he was thinking. Pulling Lassie aside, Roan asked in a low voice, "Lassie, if the blood test report at that time showed that you were positive, what would you think? If you mean the most extreme idea, then of course it would be to kill the guy who infected me with HIV on the spot." Lassie frowned slightly when she heard this. "You mean the murderer suspected Daryl Roger was the one who infected him with AIDS? Want to kill him? This is just one possibility." Roan shook his head and analyzed. "It's still the same assumption as before, but this time you not only know who infected you with HIV, but also who infected the other person with the virus. What would you do?" "Of course I would do it to that person. After all, the virus came from him," Lassie answered subconsciously, but when she thought of the guy still holding Flavia's notebook, she suddenly realized it and clapped her hands. "You mean the murderer is actually continuing the work that Flavia Fran didn't finish, that is, finding the original HIV infected person and then killing him, right?" "That's right." Roan nodded. According to the explanation of his colleague Lena, Flavia Fran was actually about to find out who the original infected person was. The specific situation and the method of finding that person were in that notebook. So if the murderer really wanted to find the original infected person, he could do it with that notebook. At this moment, Mona's shout suddenly rang out. "Everyone, I found the shadow of that guy." Roan and Lassie hurried to Mona's side. At this time, a short surveillance video was playing on the computer. A guy on a bicycle was holding a notebook, opening it from time to time to write and draw, and sneaking behind Daryl Roger. But because of his poor skills, Daryl Roger, who had studied in prison, easily discovered it, so he quickly turned the direction of the bicycle head and left quickly. However, the quality of the surveillance video was not very good, and the guy on the bicycle wore a hood and a mask, so Mona and the others did not see the other party's face clearly. But they were not without gain. When the other party rode away on the bicycle, his white dress was exposed, so Roan and the other three accurately located that the other party was a federal white man. And this guy shouldn't be that old. Mona tapped the keyboard a few times, zooming in on the bicycle, ridden by the white man in the video. The screen showed that it was a very fancy bicycle. Lassie pursed her lips at the sight, and Roan asked, "Can you find out who has bought this kind of bicycle?" "No way." Mona shook her head. "This type of bicycle is very popular among young people, so it is everywhere in New York, and there are countless cases of missing bicycles reported to the NYPD. Roan's face remained unchanged, and he did not have any negative emotions because of Mona's words. He then clapped his hands vigorously, attracting the attention of all the detectives of the number 5 investigation team, and Roan asked loudly, "William, you haven't found the second deceased among the people recorded by Flavia yet, right?" "That's right." William nodded, and then said that they found that the characters in the 2 folders were a little incomplete, and some people's information should be in Flavia Fran's notebook, and Flavia had not had time to sort it out. Luo An felt that William and his team were most likely right in their suspicions, and then he briefly explained his and Lassie's analysis, and then said, "The murderer is now very likely looking for the original 0 HIV carrier, and this person is his next target. So, we have to find this 0 carrier before the other party, and then find a way to catch the murderer who killed Flavia Fran, by waiting or other methods." "No problem." The eyes of the agents of the number 5 investigation team lit up, and they agreed loudly. As soon as Luo An finished speaking, William and other technical agents immediately began to act, putting the information of everyone in the folder together. Luo An soon discovered Flavia's investigation method, which was to check who everyone had sex with. After all, sex is one of the important means for the rapid spread of HIV. After starting the investigation through this method, everyone in the number 5 investigation team felt what freedom was. One of them was a white woman named Yinka, and the men who had sex with her in a short period of time could almost form 2 football teams. If Flavia hadn't found that the data showed that her HIV was transmitted from others, Luo An and his team would have almost thought that this woman was the zero virus carrier. By connecting these people with arrows, the number 5 investigation team quickly found 3 people that the arrows did not point to, so the next goal naturally became to find others who had sex with these 3 people. Because there were not many people, Ron and Mona were in one group, Lassie was in one group, and Ryder was in one group, and they went to find the 3 selected guys separately. Ryder, who had just returned to the number 5 investigation team and had not yet sat down, said, "So, this is actually an AIDS epidemic, right?" Arriving at the community where the first target person lived, Mona got off the co-pilot and looked at Ron speechlessly. "You can say that." Ron nodded. "The situation of this case has been sorted out, and the overall content is not complicated. A guy who first contracted the AIDS virus had no sense of public morality. Not only did he not seek treatment and concealed his illness, but he also frequently changed his partners. After these partners were infected with AIDS, they had sex with other people and then spread the virus to more people. 1 spread to 10, and 10 spread directly to 100. The murderer who killed Flavia Fran was a pitiful one among the 100. Mona smacked her tongue and then knocked on the door of the first source. The source was a male student, already an adult, named Barry. "So, why didn't you wear protection?" Ron was really confused. He remembered that many schools in the Federation gave students free contraceptives. "Because I'm a Catholic." Barry shrugged. "Young people always have their own unique reasons. In addition, I also joined an environmental protection club in our school. One of the core concepts of this club is anti-rubber." Ron, 6. Because of their FBI identities, Ron and Mona easily asked Barry about the person who infected him with HIV. As expected, it was a woman who lived nearby. The woman's name was Wenxie. She was very young, with a good figure and good looks, but she had a husband who liked to go out to play in the wild. So under various dissatisfactions, Wenxie also started her career of going out to play in the wild. After learning the purpose of Ron and Mona's visit, Wenxie struggled at first, but finally said the name of a man, Matthew Ethan. As soon as they left Wenxie's house, Lassie and Ryder called Luo An and said that they had also found the name of Matthew Ethan. Good. After hanging up the phone, Luo An turned to look at Mona on the side. "It seems that this is the unethical Mr. Zero. How about it? Can you find where this guy's now?" "Very easy." Returning to the co-pilot seat of the SUV, Mona turned on the computer and typed, and soon found the other party's current location, Queen's St. John's Hospital. Luo An frowned slightly when he heard it. Hospital? Chapter 254 Patient Zero and the Real Murderer. Because they were busy all day, and it was time to get off work, Ron and Lassie walked into St. John's Hospital in Queens the next morning. In a ward, the two successfully saw a middle-aged white man lying on a bed covered with a blanket and a tube inserted in front of his nose. Although he looked a little decadent, his appearance was quite in line with Western aesthetics. When Ron and Lassie came in, Matthew Ethan was flirting with a female nurse, taking out the FBI's golden badge, and driving the female nurse who was blinded by male beauty out of the room. Lassie looked disdainful. "Good morning, Matthew Ethan. You are really popular with women. Is it my fault that Zhangqing looks like a charmer?" Matthew Ethan laughed indifferently, looked at Lassie and Ron carefully for a few seconds, and then his eyes lit up. Ron frowned slightly. According to the information, Matthew Ethan does not distinguish between men and women. He only distinguishes between beautiful and ugly people. Too lazy to waste time talking to this guy, Ron took out a pair of handcuffs from behind and handcuffed Matthew Ethan's right hand to the bed. "Congratulations, Matthew Ethan, you are arrested. The charges that you knew you had AIDS, but you did not tell your sexual partner about it, and you also had incomplete sexual intercourse with her/them." "What?" Seeing his hands handcuffed by Ron, Matthew Ethan, who was lying on the bed, was immediately surprised, and then shouted, "Why do you say that I know I have AIDS? I don't know about it. I'm innocent. I'm a victim. Don't tell lies that are easily exposed. We have found your credit card records from a long time ago, which show that you went to the hospital for an AIDS test at that time." Lassie, who was standing next to him, chuckled when he heard this, and Roan also pulled out Matthew Ethan's medical records from the pocket in front of the bed and said in a cold voice, "In addition, your medical records show that you were hospitalized this time because of pneumocystis infection, which is a common pneumonia in AIDS patients. How about it? You feel very bad now? Fouquet, are you FBI so idle now?" After hearing what Roan said, Matthew Ethan looked very annoyed. "I don't care anyway. You can't tell this to more people. Federal law stipulates that this is my privacy right. It depends on your performance. According to federal law, federal citizens have the obligation to answer questions from federal agents." Roan raised his eyebrows slightly and turned to look at Lassie. Lassie immediately took out a small notebook from behind and asked, "Matthew Ethan, have you encountered any special circumstances in the past 2 days? I'm a person who goes out to have fun every night, and I have been lying in the hospital for the past 2 days. Is this a special situation?" Matthew Ethan said to Lassie very unhappily, then turned to look at Roan. "What on earth are you doing?" Roan did not explain the matter of Dr. Flavia Fran to Matthew Ethan, but simply narrated, "According to the accurate information we have received, because you spread seeds everywhere, people are infected with AIDS. One of them is infected with AIDS, and he has come to you with a knife to seek revenge. Son of..." Matthew Ethan's face suddenly changed. Although he would die if he was infected with AIDS, he could at least live longer. He refused to be killed by a knife. His mind turned quickly, and Matthew Ethan carefully recalled the situation of the past 2 days. Suddenly he found something, raised his head and said anxiously, "Last night, I left the ward for a few minutes, and then returned to this ward with 2 nurses. When the 3 of us walked to the door of the ward, we found a man standing in front of my bed to check my medical records. We asked who he was, and the guy said he went to the wrong room, and then he left without waiting for us to continue talking." Here, Matthew Ethan was scared, because he now carefully recalled the scene at that time, and found that the man seemed to have something in his pocket, and from the shape, it looked like a dagger. Not only that, the way the man looked at him when he spoke was not quite right. After exchanging a glance with Roan, Lassie immediately raised the notebook in her hand. "Tell me what that guy looks like." "White, very thin, looks very young, about 20 years old." Matthew Ethan hurriedly described the man's appearance, and finally said anxiously, Agent, you must send someone to protect me later. I feel that the hospital is not very safe." The image described by Matthew Ethan was almost the same as the appearance of the cyclist in the surveillance yesterday. "Relax, Matthew Ethan. If you feel that the hospital is not safe, then we can move you to a safer place, such as a prison, which must be safe." After exchanging a glance with Lassie, Roan laughed, too lazy to care about this selfish and unethical guy, ignoring the others wailing, and directly got up and left the ward. However, after Roan and Lassie left, the 2 SWAT team members who had been notified in advance still sat at the door of this ward. The surveillance facilities of St. John's Hospital are relatively complete, and there are many surveillance cameras installed in the corridor. Taking out the FBI gold badge to show his identity, Luo An asked the person in charge of the hospital monitoring room to check the surveillance footage from last night, and soon found the figure of the white young man. The other party was wearing a hat and kept lowering the brim of the hat along the way, but when he turned the corner and went down the stairs, in order to avoid the 2 patients coming towards him, the surveillance camera caught his face. "Good." After simply expressing his gratitude to the person in charge of the surveillance, Luo An took the surveillance record back to the number 5 investigation team and asked, "How is it? Can we find this guy through the facial recognition system?" William and other technical agents took screenshots of the video recordings. After tapping on the keyboard for a while, they looked embarrassed. "Sorry, this guy can't be found in the facial recognition system." Luo An's expression remained unchanged. The records of the Federal 05 facial recognition system were all recorded by guys who had made mistakes. The white man in the picture was very young, and it was possible that he had no criminal record. Turning to look at Mona, Roan continued to ask, "What about those people infected with AIDS in the folder? Are there any who match this guy's face?" "No." A crackling sound was heard, and Mona frowned as she looked at the data in the computer. "Not only are there no people infected with AIDS in these 2 files, but this white young man is not among those infected with AIDS. We will investigate later." "What?" Reed was puzzled when he heard this. Could it be that we are investigating in the wrong direction? For example, this guy didn't kill Flavia because of AIDS. Lassie scratched his head, but he still went to find Matthew Ethan. How do you explain this? Roan picked up the folder containing the personal information of AIDS patients, sat on the chair and read it carefully. After a long silence, he suddenly threw it on the table and said loudly, "Everyone, start now. Check the family members and friends of these AIDS patients. This white young man killed Dr. Flavia and went to the hospital to find and prepare to kill Matthew Ethan. I'm afraid it wasn't for himself." Chapter 255 The Truth About the AIDS Case and the Identity of the Little Boy. As Luo An finished speaking, the agents of the 5th investigation team suddenly understood and immediately started working in front of the computer. With the correct investigation direction, William, Mona and other strengths were beyond words. In just one cup of coffee, they found the identity information of the white youth. This guy's called Luo Brook. He is 24 years old this year, and his home is in Queens, New York. He has never been to college, and has no criminal record. William looked at the information in the computer and introduced loudly, "There is a woman infected with AIDS in the folder. She is Luo Brook's mother, and she is in her 40s. But Luo's mother was not infected with AIDS by Luo's father, so some time ago, after Flavia told Luo's father that her mother was infected with AIDS because she went out to play in the wild, the family has now fallen apart." Reed, Lassie and others sighed when they heard this, and Luo An also nodded. Just as he was about to speak, Mona on the side suddenly said, "I also found out one thing, that is, a girl infected with AIDS in the second folder was Luo's high school classmate. Neither of them went to college, and they both worked in a supermarket chain. The two were in a relationship. This girl was also infected with AIDS after Luo's mother, but the channel through which she was infected with AIDS was not Luo X, and the atmosphere in the number 5 investigation team was quiet for a while. He learned that his mother betrayed his father and was infected with AIDS, and his girlfriend betrayed him and was infected with AIDS. Moreover, the same woman told him these two pieces of news. Luo An took a sip of coffee, not knowing how to comment on the behavior of Flavia Fran, the instigator. But now was not the time to discuss Luo Brook's mental process. After drinking the coffee in one gulp, Luo An clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention and said, "Can you find out where Luo Brook is now?" "Of course, it's easy." Mona tapped on the keyboard and quickly found the other party. Luo Brook went to the home of his girlfriend who was infected with AIDS this morning, and then rode his bike straight to St. John's Hospital in Queens. "Okay." Luo An heard this and just stood up to speak. Augustus suddenly pushed open the door of the number 5 investigation team office area and walked in, smiling and shouting, "Everyone, good news. The trace examination department has just found the identity of the little boy." And the expressions of the agents of the number 5 investigation team froze slightly, and then they all turned their eyes to Luo An. Luo An was also somewhat helpless, but he immediately reacted and continued to narrate the unfinished order. "Ryder, Lassie, you two immediately lead a SWAT team to arrest Luo Brook." "No problem." Ryder and Lassie nodded together, and then walked quickly into the equipment warehouse. "Mona, you and I will go to the trace examination department." "Okay." Mona picked up a laptop and stood up. Augustus saw that the expressions on everyone's faces were a little strange, so he asked what was going on. After learning about Luo Brook's experience from William, the expression on Augustus' face did not change at all. After all, he had been in the criminal justice department for so many years, and Augustus had encountered more miserable and outrageous situations than this many times, and the threshold of emotional fluctuations had long been raised a lot. In a room in the office area of the trace examination department. "Thank you for your hard work." Pushing open the door and entering the room, Luo An immediately expressed his gratitude to several agents of the trace examination department with a smile on his face. After a few brief conversations, Luo An turned the topic to business, and Mona next to him asked, "Neil, how did you find out the identity of this little boy?" "Fingerprints on his clothes." As mentioned earlier, the little boy was too young to do facial recognition, and all 10 fingers were cut off in advance, so fingerprints could not be checked. So the forensic doctor at the time said that he hoped to find fingerprints on the box containing the body to find the identity of the boy. Fingerprints? Of course not. Hearing Mona's question, the chubby Agent Neil shook his head repeatedly. We didn't find any fingerprints on that box. The murderer must be a very cautious guy. Then how did you do it? Luo An picked up a cup of coffee from the side and handed it to Agent Neil, smiling. Don't keep me in suspense. Haha, it's very simple. Agent Neil raised his eyebrows, opened the small refrigerator next to him, and took out a tightly sealed glass bottle from it. And in the glass bottle were two amputated little feet. Mona was dumbfounded when she saw what was in the glass bottle. Luo An was also speechless about the guys in the trace examination department who specialized in technology. If I'm not mistaken, these are the 2 feet of the little boy, right? Yes. Agent Neil explained with a smile. As you know, the body of the little boy has been mummified, and his feet are quite shriveled. So I separated his feet from the joints and soaked them in preservatives. After the muscle fibers swelled, I was able to extract the lines of his feet naturally. After listening to Agent Neil's description, Mona's mouth twitched slightly and then saw Agent Neil's face full of pride and even enjoyment when he spoke. Mona silently took a step back and decided to try to have less contact with the group of people in the trace examination department in the future. In Luo An's opinion, from a technical perspective, the group of people in the trace examination department are alright, but Luo An sighed and could only hope that the family of the little boy would not make trouble after seeing their children's fingers cut off and their feet cut off. Okay. Waving his hand to refuse Nell's kindness in handing over the glass bottle for him to admire, Roan asked directly, so, who is this little boy? His name is Ansel Ward, and he is 7 years old. Agent Nell put the glass bottle back into the refrigerator, walked to the computer beside him, and tapped a few times, then pointed to the interface inside and said, Ansel's grandmother entered his fingerprints and footprints in the hospital during Ansel's safety week. Good. Roan took a look at the information in the computer, then turned and left to give the seat to Mona. Mona entered the information of little Ansel into the notebook on her chest, and after a simple tap, she quickly found the grandmother's home address, a community in Queens, New York. Half an hour later, Roan and Mona successfully met an elderly white woman who was not very physically fit. Oh, God. The grandmother's name was Lan Rusha, and she believed in God. After learning about the death of little Ansel from Roan and Mona, her eyes were suddenly filled with sadness, and her hands tightly grasped the cross on her neck. Please accept my condolences. Seeing that Lan Rusha was in a bad mental state, Mona hurriedly moved to her side to comfort her, and Luo An also poured her a glass of water. After soothing Lan Rusha's emotions, Luo An began to simply ask about the situation of little Ansel. It shouldn't be little Ansel. Lan Rusha sat on the sofa with a complicated expression on her face. It should be Polly who died. Mona was a little confused. Who is this Polly? Lan Rusha said coldly, Polly is my daughter. Luo An, who was sitting next to him, didn't understand what her daughter had done to make her mother so angry. Just as he was about to ask, the phone in his pocket suddenly rang. Chapter 256, Smell of rancid urine, stink, salted fish. In a neighborhood in Queens, New York. When the phone rang, Roan immediately stood up and walked to the side of the room. This is Roan. It's me, Ryder. The voice on the other end of the phone was a little noisy, but Ryder's words were still very clear. The mission was successfully completed. We have captured Elwood Brook. There were no casualties. This operation was just to arrest an ordinary young man who had not received systematic training. For Ida, Lassie and the group of SWAT members, it was really simple. Good. Luo An nodded, but he heard that Ryder's tone seemed a little wrong, and immediately asked, did something go wrong? Well, there is indeed a problem, but it's not Elwood Brooks. Before Ida finished speaking, the phone was snatched away by Lassie. Lassie's voice was a little low, but her tone was a little gloating. Luo An, we just arrested Elwood Brook in front of St. John's Hospital. After our operation, the doctor who was responsible for taking care of patient 0 Matthew Ethan told us that they just detected early traces of Kaposi's sarcoma and 2 other tumors in Matthew Ethan's body. Luo An's eyebrows moved slightly when he heard this. Kaposi's sarcoma is a common complication of AIDS patients. In most cases, people who suffer from this thing basically have 1 to 3 years left to live. In addition to the traces of other tumors in the body, Matthew Ethan didn't have much savings at this time, and his remaining time was obviously just around the corner. However, Luo An had no sympathy for Matthew Ethan, a self-inflicted selfish guy who harmed a group of people. So he remained calm and said, "Lassie, just be happy for a while. Bring Elwood Brook back first." "Okay." Lassie smiled, nodded, and agreed, and hung up the phone. Luo An put the phone back in his pocket, and sat back on the sofa. At this time, Grandma Langrucia was introducing her daughter Polly to Mona. "I really regret giving birth to her." From her face and her conversation, Langrucia is a very cultured old lady. But when talking about her daughter Polly, Langrucia's face was full of anger. "Polly has been a naughty child since she was young, but her father and I didn't care. After all, she is a child and it's not a problem for her to be lively." But as she grew older, Polly became worse. Not only did she skip classes and drop out of school, but she also hung out with a bunch of bad friends, and even got addicted to reading. Mona and Luo An frowned when they heard this. Once someone gets addicted to reading, most of the time nothing good will happen. As expected, Langrucia continued. "Then one day, Polly suddenly came back with a big belly, and she refused to tell me who the father of the child was. There was no way, so her father and I could only help her bear the cost of giving birth, and named the child Ansel Ward." Okay. Mona simply recorded this information in the small notebook, and then asked, "So, have you been taking care of little Ansel all this time?" "We take care of him?" Langrucia sneered at the words. "Sometimes Polly would ask me to help take care of little Ansel for one night, and then she would disappear completely in the next few months. Then she would come home conscious, and say that she had quit drugs, and hope that I would return little Ansel to her." Langrucia said that she didn't want to hand little Ansel to Polly, but she was old and her husband died during this period. She was really lacking in energy, so she had to choose to trust Polly once. After all, she was little Ansel's mother. But from the current situation, Polly is still untrustworthy as before. As Mona wrote, she continued to ask, "When was the last time you saw little Ansel?" "About 6 or 7 months ago." "What about Polly?" "Same. I haven't seen her since then." Mona frowned slightly when she heard this, and Roan, who was sitting next to her, stood up and asked, "Ms. Langrucia, do you have a photo of Polly?" The SUV was driving slowly on the road in the dark. It was not that Roan didn't want to step on the accelerator, but Mona, who was sitting in the passenger seat, was searching for Polly through her notebook. In the photo that Langrucia gave to Roan and Mona, Polly was a white girl with short golden hair, a pretty face, and a passionate look. Luo An took a quick look at the photo and threw it aside. It's a pity that she was addicted to drugs. Even if she wasn't addicted, Polly probably wouldn't be a good mother. Mona, who was sitting in the passenger seat, said casually while typing on the keyboard, "I have a high school classmate who is very similar to Polly. She also chose to drop out of school and went out to hang out with a group of guys from nowhere. We chatted some time ago. Although she was not addicted to drugs, her husband was missing, and she either beat or scolded her children. Her whole life was a mess." Luo An was a little confused. "Which high school classmate of yours? When did you contact her?" "It was some time ago, when I just moved into your apartment." Mona replied casually. "She was in urgent need of money, so she contacted me." Luo An frowned slightly. "Did you lend it to her?" "Of course not." Mona pouted. She and that female classmate had only talked in high school and were not familiar with each other, but now she actually came to her to borrow money. Mona judged that it was likely that she had already borrowed from everyone she knew, but never paid it back, resulting in no one willing to continue lending her money, so she began to contact people she was not very familiar with, such as Mona. Luo An breathed a sigh of relief when he heard this. At this moment, Mona tapped the keyboard and said with a smile, "Okay, I found this Polly. Great, thank you for your hard work." Luo An gripped the steering wheel tightly with both hands. "Where is that woman now?" "Records show that she is in a women's shelter in Brooklyn, at 114A Convent Street." Half an hour later, in the shelter, after showing the FBI's golden badge to the shelter director, Roan took out Polly's fake photo, and the other party nodded. "Yes, dinner is indeed in this shelter." Mona raised her eyebrows. Dinner? Roan didn't care about this. It was just a fake name, which was normal, so he asked directly, where is she now? She's inside. The person in charge pointed to the densely packed beds in the shelter and shrugged. You can find it yourself. I don't know where it is exactly. Okay. This is a women's shelter, so most of the women in it are dressed casually. Seeing Roan, a handsome man, come in, some young women hurriedly pulled up their clothes to cover their vital parts, and more older women not only didn't care, but whistled at Roan. Roan, whose appetite had been spoiled by Mona, didn't bother to pay attention to these women at all, not to mention that the mixed smell of sour urine, stinky salted fish, etc. in the shelter was very overpowering. Especially the smell of salted fish. Even though Roan was determined, he still felt a little nauseous. Holding his breath, Luo An searched one by one. Just as he was halfway through the left side of the shelter, Mona's shout suddenly rang out from the right side of the shelter. Stop. Don't run. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257 Poisonous Insects. Hearing Mona's shout, Roan turned around and found a topless woman jumping between the beds in the room, heading straight for the exit of the shelter. The woman's hair was brown instead of blonde, but her face was 80% similar to Polly in the photo. Roan immediately determined that she was the person he and Mona were looking for. Fouquet. Mona followed closely behind the woman. Her face was extremely ugly. However, the reason why Mona looked ugly was not because the other party ran away, but because when the other party ran away just now, she subconsciously shouted and then was knocked down by the strange smell in the shelter. The moment Roan saw the other party's face clearly, he did not hesitate and immediately jumped between the beds and rushed towards Polly like the wind. Luo An's action scared many women lying on the bed. Some women were so frightened that they cursed loudly, but many women watching the show applauded Luo An. Cool. So handsome. Without paying attention to the group of women watching the show, Luo An moved to the door of the shelter in the blink of an eye, blocking Polly's way forward, and said seriously, stop. Polly had no intention of stopping. She grabbed a piece of clothing from the bed of a passerby watching the show, and threw it to Luo An, and turned around, and started to run to the other side. But the next second, Luo An casually slapped the clothing aside, moved quickly to Polly's side, and grabbed her hands tightly. Don't move. Mona also ran over at this time, and immediately took out the handcuffs, and handcuffed her wrists. Damn it. Why did you arrest me? Feeling her hands were handcuffed, Polly struggled frantically, but her long-term drug use made her very weak. She just ran for a while, and after her physical strength was exhausted, her struggling movements were more like a random rubbing. In addition, Polly's upper body was naked, so Roan's mouth twitched, and he quickly took a piece of clothing and covered her. With a blank look at Roan, Mona took the clothes and forced them on Polly, then took her out of the large room with beds in the shelter and temporarily borrowed the administrator's office. Why did you arrest me? I didn't do anything. Polly was still very angry, and Roan crossed his legs. Then why did you run? Polly rolled her eyes. You didn't say you were the FBI when you came in. I thought you were the poor people outside who asked me for money in order to make a living. Polly also has some side jobs, such as temporarily playing the role of a thief and robbing the rich to help herself. Okay. Roan did not continue to waste time talking to Polly about this issue. He directly turned the topic to the point. Polly, we are here today for your son, Ansel Ward. Unfortunately, he was murdered. Oh. After Roan finished speaking, Polly's face did not change, and she said lightly, this is also a good thing for him. What? What did you say? Seeing that Polly didn't care about this matter and even yawned, Roan frowned slightly. Mona stood up and widened her eyes. Is this your attitude towards your son? He is your biological son. So what? Polly still didn't care. If he dies, he dies. Fouquet. Hearing this, Mona was completely furious. Roan was too lazy to continue talking nonsense with Polly here, and directly pulled her up from the chair. Come with us. Investigation team number 5, office area. Elliot Brooke has confessed his crime. Lassie and Reed walked out of an interrogation room, handed a folder to Roan, and said, "It was a very easy interrogation." After learning that Matthew Ethan, the infected person 0, did not have much time to live, Elliot Brooke admitted everything. Not only did he explain the whole process of killing Dr. Flavia Farron, he also explained where the murder weapon, notebook and the red bag were hidden at this time. Roan took the folder and looked down at it. Mona, who was sitting next to him, asked casually, "What was the reason for the crime?" Of course it was because of anger, and the reason is the same as before. Reed picked up the coffee on the table and drank it all and said, Elliot Brooke learned from Flavia within a few days that his mother was infected with AIDS, and then learned that his girlfriend betrayed him and was infected with AIDS. Because of anger, he killed Flavia Farron, the person who told him the news. It was an escapist mentality. What about the guy who infected his girlfriend with AIDS? Mona was a little confused. Elliot Brooke didn't kill his girlfriend, which could be understood as he loved his girlfriend very much. Even if she betrayed him, he couldn't bear to kill her. But what about the guy who infected her girlfriend with AIDS? Although Mona is not a man, she can understand why men are angry. Because that man is Elliot Brooke's good brother since childhood. When he was a child, that guy saved Elliot Brooke's life once, so. Luo An finished reading the interrogation record, closed the folder, and answered Mona's question. At the same time, he deepened his understanding of the concept of fire prevention, theft prevention and good brother prevention. Okay. Mona was a little emotional after hearing the details of the incident. Lassie next to her stretched her waist and pointed to another interrogation room. "What's the situation with that woman? Why didn't you interrogate her after bringing her back? That woman is a slut." Mona, who had depended on her mother since childhood, was very dissatisfied with Polly. For the first time, she used dirty words to describe her in front of several people. However, after hearing what Mona said about Polly's attitude towards her son, Reed and Lassie's faces were not very good. The Federation is a country that attaches great importance to family culture, and they can't stand people like Polly. However, when she heard that Mona found 2 small bags of flour in Polly's pocket on the way back to the federal building, Lassie's eyes turned, and she understood Luo An's idea. "Luo An, you plan to leave Polly alone, and then interrogate her when her drug addiction kicks in, right?" "That's right." Luo An laughed. "Now everyone can see that Polly is obviously a drug addict. The words of drug addicts can't be trusted at all. But on the contrary, when the drug addiction kicks in, they can also agree to any request from others for a mouthful of flour, even asking him to cut off his thigh or even kill his whole family." So Luo An planned to interrogate Polly when her drug addiction kicks in. At that time, there would be no need for any psychological tactics, and she would take the initiative to confess everything. As expected, more than an hour later, when Roan and Lassie entered the interrogation room, Polly, who was handcuffed to the chair, was fidgeting, with a runny nose, sneezing and cold sweat. "Good afternoon, Miss Polly, you don't look very well." Roan handed Polly a glass of juice. "Drink this to moisten your throat. When can you let me go?" Polly took the juice and drank it all, trembling all over, her face pale. "Is it enough to find the murderer who killed my son? I sold my son to him for $800. I know who he is. You go and call the sketch artist now. I can provide you with his appearance." "Damn guy. Can I leave after that? By the way, I have told you everything I know. Can you give me a little less flour? Just a little, please." It was exactly the same as Roan's idea. They didn't even interrogate her, but Polly took the initiative to confess everything. However, the content of the confession made Lassie in the interrogation room, and Mona and Reed in the monitoring room all look gloomy. Chapter 258, Cage-like Villa. Investigation Team Number 5, Office Area. After the portrait artist finished drawing the appearance of the guy who bought the child for money according to Polly's description, Roan and Lassie did not give Polly flour, but asked the detectives of the Trace Examination Department to use some methods to force her to endure the period of drug addiction and return to their respective workstations. William and other technical detectives began to find the identity of the man, based on the portrait. Mona looked at the interrogation record with an ugly face. "So, this woman Polly sold her son, just because she needed money to buy flour." "That's right." Roan picked up the coffee and took a sip with an expressionless face. Lassie added, Polly has been taking flour for more than 20 years. In the eyes of such people, as long as they can get flour, there is nothing that cannot be traded. At the beginning, Polly used her private parts to make money to buy flour. But as the time of taking flour became longer and longer, Polly began to have some ulcers on her body, and some disgusting problems began to appear below. So Polly's price became lower and lower, until no one was interested in it. After this road was completely blocked, Polly began to turn to petty theft and robbing the rich to support herself. Son of eating, Mona cursed in a low voice and put the interrogation record back on the table. Luo An turned to look at William. How is it? Is there the identity of the guy and the facial portrait in the database? Of course. And it's very detailed. William laughed and pointed to the information he just found in the computer and introduced. The criminal record shows that this guy is called Facundo Hunter, 37 years old, and has been in and out of federal prison many times for multiple crimes such as illegal carrying of firearms, intentional injury, and drunk driving. The information in the database shows that he currently lives in a mid-range community in Long Island. In addition, the records from the ATF, Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, show that Facundo Hunter is suspected of purchasing a large number of weapons in the underground world, and these things are most likely stored in the community where he lives at this time. In our free federation, human traffickers also need guns to ensure their own safety. Luo An raised his head and drank the coffee in one gulp, then stood up and looked at Riad. Let's go and discuss the consequences of human trafficking with this human trafficker. Okay. Riad grinned, stood up and walked into the equipment room with Roan. 2 hours later, in a middle-class community in Long Island, Riad, fully armed, stood next to the black SUV, and Roan, also fully armed, was looking down at the stun grenade in his hand. It has been a long time since I used it. I wonder if it is rusty. Next to the two of them were two teams of fully armed SWAT members holding explosion-proof shields. Two of them were investigating the specific situation of the 3-story villa where Facundo Hunter was. Sir, there are people in the target villa. The front and back doors are both made of steel plates plus wood, and the steel plates are extremely thick. Not long after, the communicator on Roan's chest rang, and the two SWAT members who were investigating the situation said, it is recommended to use a large number of plastic bombs. Okay, thank you for your hard work. Roan nodded and turned to look at Riad. Riad immediately led a team of SWAT members to the back door, and Roan and another team of SWAT members slowly moved to the front door. The team member holding the explosion-proof shield stood at the front. After reaching the side of the villa door, the SWAT team member behind him immediately walked out of the team, took out a large piece of yellow plastic bomb, and stuck it on the door. 3, 2, 1. Counting down to 3, the two SWAT team members at the front and back doors pressed the start button at the same time. Boom. Boom. A deafening explosion suddenly sounded, and the steel plate plus wooden house certificate was instantly blown into the villa by the flames. FBI. Go. 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 Speed. Speed. Go upstairs. Go upstairs. Check the basement carefully. The next second after the explosion, the two teams of SWAT team members instantly filed in, holding rifles in both hands and quickly checking every room in the villa. Luo An didn't rush upstairs. He walked to the door of the villa that was blown away, and found that the door was not only made of steel plate plus solid wood, but also equipped with foam board and rubber inside, and the sound insulation measures were very good. At the same time, a magnetic lock was added to the top of the door. The owner of the villa paid great attention to safety, and was afraid that the door would be pried open. But the FBI never pry open doors, they either kick or blow them up. Bang, bang. The SWAT team members who suddenly broke in obviously scared the two security guards in the villa. They raised their weapons to fight back, but were immediately shot in the head by the SWAT team members. Facundo Hunter was also scared. He was watching TV when the explosion sounded. Hearing the intruder shouting FBI, Facundo Hunter's face suddenly changed. He grabbed the pistol beside him and fired 2 shots at the SWAT team members. After suppressing the opponent to hide against the wall on the side, he immediately rushed to the balcony of the villa. At this time, Luo An happened to walk up to the second floor. He found that the floor and walls of this villa were all raised and thickened, and obvious sound insulation measures were taken. When he walked to the balcony, Luo An found that the glass here was also specially made and thickened, and they were all locked tightly, and could only be opened with a key. A special cage. Maybe there are other uses. Luo An clicked his tongue, and turned around to see Facundo Hunter rushing towards him with a pistol in his hand and red eyes. Shit. Seeing the obstacle on his way, Facundo Hunter raised his pistol, and prepared to pull the trigger without hesitation. But Roan was faster than him. When he saw Facundo Hunter for the first time, Roan threw the stun grenade he had been holding for a long time at him. Boom. There was a fierce explosion and a dazzling white light. Facundo Hunter instantly felt his eyes turn white and his ears hurt. He lost his balance and fell in front of Roan. After kicking the pistol that Facundo Hunter had dropped to the ground, Roan waved to the SWAT members standing behind him with their rifles, looking at each other in bewilderment. He stepped over Facundo Hunter with a very calm expression and said, "Take this guy away with handcuffs, and remember to put the pistol in the evidence bag." "Okay." Several SWAT members nodded and quickly stepped aside to make way for Roan. At the same time, Riyad's voice came from the third floor of the villa. "Roan, there's a discovery here." The layout of the third floor of the villa was very simple, with several separated rooms, and the doors were all equipped with magnetic locks. Roan walked up the stairs to the third floor, and Riyad pointed to 4 of the rooms. In each room, there was a trembling little boy, who was estimated to be no more than 10 years old. Roan looked around carefully, and found that there was not even a landline in the whole villa. It is indeed a cage. Riyad put away the rifle in his hand, sighed, tilted his head and said, "Before this operation, I thought this was a transit station for a human trafficking organization. But now it seems that it is not the case." Riyad had solved similar cases when he was in SWAT before, but the conditions of the places prepared by those human traffickers for their cargoes were not so good. This villa obviously has other uses. Turning around, he asked the SWAT team to take the children back to the federal building, and then Roan called the trace examination department and asked them to carefully check the villa. Finally, he said, "Go back and ask this Facundo Hunter. He should be able to tell us a lot of things." Chapter 259, Federal Youth Hobby Association. Investigation Team Number 5, Lounge. The 4 little boys who were rescued from the villa were sitting here. Mona and Lassie were distributing snacks and juice to them and whispering to comfort them. Augustus, holding the documents, stood at the door of the lounge and looked inside. He frowned slightly and turned to William and asked, "How is it? Have you found out the identity information of these 4 children and who their parents are?" "Sorry, I only found the identity information of 2 of the children." William spread his hands, saying that it was useless to find it because the 2 children had no parents and were among the children reported missing by the New York Child Welfare Agency. As for the other 2 children, William and other technical agents directly stated that they could not find the identity of these 2 children. That's because they are not federal citizens. At this moment, Lassie pushed open the door of the lounge and walked out, explaining, "Mona and I just asked, and the remaining 2 children don't know who their parents are, but they are from a children's welfare home in El Salvador, South America." Augustus sighed when he heard this, handed the document in his hand to Lassie, and said, "This is the physical examination report of the trace examination department for these 4 children. They all have a lot of bruises on their bodies, and they also have permanent injuries on their backs." Lassie took a look at the contents of the report, frowning. "So, this time we actually encountered a group of trans people. How many perverts in New York have sexually assaulted these children? Those people are probably not a small number." At this moment, Luo An and Riyad, with a gloomy face, walked over. Seeing the confusion on Lassie and Augustus's faces, Roan took out a few videotapes from behind his buttocks. "This is what the trace examination department found in the basement of that villa. The content inside, well, it hurt the eyes a little." Hearing Roan's words, and seeing the expression on Riyad's face, Augustus and Lassie guessed the content of the videotape. Augustus took the videotape and shook it, and asked, "Apart from these children, are there any other male faces in it?" "No." Roan didn't say anything, and Riyad on the side, said in a serious tone, "I forced myself to watch the entire videotape, but there were no men's faces in it. I only saw tattoos on some of the men." It's better than nothing. Augustus nodded and patted Riyad's shoulder. Riyad's children were about the same age as these children, and watching these things was really a torture for Riyad. It doesn't matter. Riyad shook his head to indicate that he was fine, as long as he caught these guys. Half an hour later, after confirming that the trace examination department had not found anything else, Ron and Mona walked into the interrogation room and began to interrogate Facundo Hunter. Good afternoon, Facundo Hunter. Congratulations on going to prison for further studies again. Seeing Mona open her laptop and get ready, Ron took a sip of coffee and smiled. I just don't know how you will be treated in prison this time. I heard that synesthesia seems to be easily bullied in prison. The adjective bullied has been weakened by Ron. The actual status of synesthesia in federal prisons includes, but is not limited to, being beaten by others when they are in a bad mood, having saliva or other liquid spit on their food, being raped while taking a shower, etc. Anyway, it's not a good thing. As a person who has been in and out of prison many times, who used to look down on cinephiles and even assaulted that kind of people, Facundo Hunter heard Ron's words and shouted excitedly, "Don't slander me. I'm not a cinephile. I haven't touched those little boys at all." Wow. Ron raised his eyebrows. The structure of that villa is so special, and those boys still have scars on their bodies. Do you think the judge will believe you? Fouquet. I'm really not a cinephile. Facundo Hunter cursed again, and then he was silent for a moment, and said seriously, I can tell you everything I know, but the premise is that you give me complete immunity in this case. This joke is too cold, Facundo. Ron leaned back, crossed his legs, and smiled, but we can explain to the judge as appropriate, based on the specific situation you mentioned. Seeing the expression on Ron's face, Facundo Hunter was silent for a long time, and finally gritted his teeth, and nodded in agreement. Seeing the photo of little Ansel Ward that Ron placed in front of him, Facundo Hunter admitted that he had spent money to buy the child from her mother, and said it was his mother who took the initiative to sell him to me. I didn't force her at all. Okay. I was the passive party. Mona rolled her eyes, where Facundo Hunter couldn't see. Ron was too lazy to argue with him about this and asked directly, but Ansel Ward died a few days ago. What happened? How should I know? Ansel Ward waved his hands, indicating that he was just a coolie working at the grassroots level, and was only responsible for taking care of the child. If you say so, then I don't think there is any need for interrogation. Seeing that Facundo Hunter had cleared himself of all charges, Ron sneered. Listen, Facundo Hunter, now we are giving you a chance, not begging you to give us information. To tell you the truth, the trace examination department found a lot of useful clues in that villa. The reason we came to interrogate you is just a necessary procedure, understand? After saying that, Ron stood up and was about to leave. Seeing this, Facundo Hunter hurriedly shouted, Okay, I will tell you what happened next. Good. Seeing that Mona gave him a thumbs up calmly, Ron raised his mouth slightly and gave her a look, then sat back in his chair and said coldly, Then tell me. I didn't lie to you just now. I'm really just an ordinary person working at the grassroots level. Facundo Hunter sighed and began to talk about the whole thing. The last time he was studying in prison, Facundo met a guy named Rick who was released earlier than him. The other party said that there was a way to make money after being released from prison, and if Facundo couldn't make it, he could go to him. So Facundo went to Rick without thinking, after being released from prison. After meeting and chatting with Rick for a few days, Facundo realized that the way to make money mentioned by the other party was to buy and sell children, especially little boys. I actually hesitated at the time. At this point, Facundo raised his thumb and index finger to make a gesture insulting the Korean country. However, considering that Facundo then said that it was all for the sake of making money, and it didn't matter what he did, Luo An felt that his so-called consideration should not have lasted more than 10 seconds. In Facundo's words, this organization is very large, called the Federal Youth Hobby Association. They have their own organizational charter, their own guiding rules, and even an action guide to teach association members how to not be discovered by law enforcement agencies, and how to cultivate and develop the body and mind of teenagers so that they will always listen to them. Finally, Fecundo Hunter sneered and said, "This organization has a lot of members. According to Rick, there are more than 10,000 members in the city of New York." Hearing Fecundo's introduction, Mona's face completely darkened. Luo An frowned slightly, realizing something was wrong. At this moment, Augustus suddenly opened the door of the interrogation room and said, "Luo An, Mona, come out for a moment." Chapter 260 Varine's Investigation and Mona Upgrade. Investigation Team Number 5. The corridor outside the interrogation room. Hearing Augustus' words, Roan and Mona walked out of the interrogation room and found that Special Agent Supervisor Varines was standing in the corridor. Taking Roan into the monitoring room next to the monitoring room, Varines sat on a chair and asked in a serious tone, "Roan, what is going on with this case?" Augustus just sent her a message saying that investigation team number 5 had discovered another major incident, but did not explain it in detail. "Sir, have you heard of the Federal Youth Hobby Association?" Roan first asked Varines a question, and then began to briefly describe the investigation process of this case. During the description process, Roan kept observing Varine's expression calmly. Varines was not surprised when she heard the name of this association, and her expression did not change much. Roan raised his eyebrows when he saw this. Sure enough, how could the FBI not have discovered such an organization before? "I just don't know why they have not taken any action." After listening to Luo An's narration, Varines groaned for a while, frowned and said, "Luo An, this organization has actually been under the surveillance of our FBI. Varines has more information about the Federal Youth Association." In her introduction, the main bases of the Federal Youth Association are San Francisco and New York. It has repeatedly called on the parliament to legislate or amend the law so that children can have sexual rights without being sexually harassed and exploited, repeal the age of sexual conduct laws, especially those that prohibit adult men from having sex with teenagers freely. "We demand the release of men and teenagers detained due to these laws." The slogans were very loud, but in fact, they used protecting the sexual autonomy of teenagers as an excuse to sexually assault boys. In 1995, the Federal Youth Association collapsed due to strong criticism from federal public opinion and a sweep by law enforcement agencies. A large number of the organization's main leaders were thrown into prison, leaving only a few contact mailboxes in San Francisco that rarely responded. After all, child crime is one of the federal felonies, so the FBI has never let go of monitoring the remaining members of the organization. Luo An raised his eyebrows when he heard this, but this organization has made a comeback in New York, and its scale is getting bigger and bigger. "That's right." Varines nodded and said in a deep voice, "So, someone provided them with shelter." Luo An's expression did not change. This was already obvious. It's just that the FBI has not taken any action, so he now has some doubts whether some people in the FBI's senior management are also involved. "You must keep the investigation process of this case secret, and don't let too many people know." After thinking for a while, Varines stood up and looked at Luo An with a gloomy face and said solemnly, "The methods, behaviors, procedures, etc. in the process of handling the case must be legal, and try not to leave the other party with excuses to attack. I will also investigate this case when I go back, and I must communicate in time if I find any situation." The meaning of Varine's words was very clear, that is, she would investigate the situation at a higher level, and the specific details below would be handled by the number 5 investigation team. "Okay, sir." Luo An nodded in agreement, and when Varines left the monitoring room, he opened the door for her and whispered, "Be careful, sir." "Yeah." Varines raised her lips slightly and responded in a low voice. Although she didn't think she would encounter any danger while investigating this case, Luo An's caring words still made her feel very useful. After brushing Varines's favor, Luo An smiled as he watched her walk into the elevator and turned back to the office area of the number 5 investigation team. Mona sat at the table in the office area and asked, "Luo An, what did Chief Varines say?" Augustus also walked out of the team leader's office at this time. "Continue the investigation." Luo An waved his hand, indicating that there was no reason to let go of this case involving children, and there was no problem in continuing the investigation. It's just that the case may involve some high-level figures, so the specific investigation process must be more secretive. Good. Great. The agents of the number 5 investigation team all breathed a sigh of relief when they heard this. After all, there are still some cases within the FBI that the top brass choose to suppress and not investigate. This is not uncommon. Augustus's expression did not change. Verine's choice and order did not surprise him. After all, she had an uncle at the Washington headquarters, and there were few situations that Verines could tolerate and retreat. Mona looked at Roan with a smile, and just as she was about to return to her seat to start working, Augustus suddenly said, "Roan, Lassie, Mona, come to my office." Okay. In the office, the 4 of them sat down, and Augustus handed the 3 of them several folders. Opening the folder, it was not a notice of bonus distribution after solving the Drive Flavia Franzades murder case. After all, the NEAT case was just concluded today, and the case report had not been completed. The folder actually contained a notice that Roan, Mona, and Lassie would be transferred to Los Angeles next month. The notice contained the positions of the 3 people. Roan was still a senior special agent, deputy team leader, and Lassie was still a senior special agent. To Mona's surprise, the notice showed that after she was transferred and arrived in Los Angeles, her rank was promoted from ordinary special agent to senior special agent. Mona raised her head in surprise, while Roan and Lassie applauded her with smiles on their faces. Congratulations, Mona. Congratulations. Congratulations. From the perspective of other trainee agents who joined the FBI New York branch at the same time, Mona's promotion from ordinary special agent to senior special agent was too fast. A small number of them are still trainee agents, and most of them are promoted to senior special agents after becoming full-time special agents. But compared to this guy Roan, Mona's promotion speed is much slower. Moreover, in so many cases, Mona's role in the investigation process is visible to the naked eye. Roan has always felt that Mona's promotion speed is too slow, so after briefly talking to Verinas about Ryder's situation, he also talked about Mona's rank issue. "Thank you, sir." Mona smiled and thanked him repeatedly. She was actually the same as Roan, and didn't care about the level of the agent. But after being promoted to a senior special agent, her salary increased a lot, which made her particularly happy. As a federal woman with a relatively independent personality and many years of single experience, Mona did not rely on others for money. When there were financial problems, Mona subconsciously chose to cut back on food and clothing instead of asking for help. Even if that person was Roan, who was already living with Mona. In the team leader's office, the 4 of them simply chatted about Mona's promotion with a smile for a while, and then Augustus asked Lassie and Mona to leave early, leaving Roan alone. As the door of the team leader's office was closed, Augustus didn't waste any words and asked directly, "Roan, do you know who is the head of the criminal investigation team of the FBI Los Angeles branch?" "I know. Chief Verines gave me the contact information of that person." Hearing Augustus's question, Roan smiled and nodded. Chapter 261, Youth Hobby Association, Central Organization. The FBI Los Angeles division was familiar to him. After carefully looking through Roan Greenwood's memory, Roan discovered that the other person's name was Pot and Burn. Roan Greenwood had taken a course taught by him when he was studying at the FBI Training Academy. However, after only a few classes of that course, Pot and Burn was transferred away, and Roan Greenwood felt quite regretful at the time. "Yes, it's your former teacher." Augustus took a sip of coffee and smiled. "As far as I know, he used to be active outside the Federation and has rich experience in solving cases. You should be able to learn a lot of new things when you go there this time." Roan smiled when he heard this, but did not answer. Fortunately, Pot and Burn stayed in the FBI Training Academy for a relatively short time at that time, and he did not teach Roan Greenwood many classes. In addition, Roan Greenwood had just entered the FBI Training Academy at that time and was not very adaptable, so his performance in all aspects was average and was not taken seriously by Pot and Burn. Otherwise, who knows whether the FBI, which has been operating outside the federal government for many years, will find any problems with Roan in the future. The two chatted briefly for a while, and then Roan got up and left the team leader's office, turning back to his workstation. At the same time, William and other technical agents had found the Rick through the testimony of Facundo Hunter. Rick Hull, 41 years old this year, has been in and out of federal prisons many times for various crimes. Recent data shows that his financial situation is good and his living standard has improved a lot compared to before. William tapped the keyboard a few times, showing Rick's current residence on the computer screen, and then looked up and asked, "Are you going to catch this guy?" "Not for the time being." Roan shook his head. At this time, Lassie and Reed had completed the interrogation of Facundo Hunter. Holding the interrogation record, Luo An explained as he flipped through it. According to Facundo Hunter, the association divides the little boys into 3 categories, A, B, and C, based on their quality. The 4 little boys we rescued from the villa were only in the lowest category, C, and the customers were all ordinary people who occasionally went to the villa. The body we found earlier, Little Ansel Ward, belonged to the B category, and the association sold this type of boy to its members. As for the highest category, A, Facundo Hunter didn't know, and his level was not high enough to contact those people. Not only that, Luo An finished speaking, and Lassie next to him continued. Facundo Hunter also said that the people in the association were divided into small groups like a terrorist organization, so they couldn't accuse each other. Mona nodded and understood what the two meant. In other words, we can't just go and capture this Rick here now to avoid alerting the enemy. Instead, we have to find a way to follow this line, find all the perverts in this organization, and then catch them all in one fell swoop. That's right. Roan nodded, gave Mona a look, and then added, in addition, this organization has actually been buying and selling little boys and making profits from it, so they must have a central organization. Our next primary goal is to find this central organization and then destroy it. As long as we destroy this central organization, we have a great chance of finding every pervert and boy in this association through the people in the central organization. Understood. The agents of the number 5 investigation team nodded in unison, and William and other technical agents began to type quickly. Let's start investigating Rick Hull's interpersonal relationships. Lassie glanced at Roan, stood up and said, Facundo Hunter said that Rick Hull, like him, joined this organization just to make money, and he is heterosexual and often hangs out in several bars. I'll go to those bars to find out the news. Be careful. Roan nodded, turned around and motioned Reed to act with her and to meet the other party outside at any time. At the same time, he handed Lassie a communicator. Remember to call for support immediately if you encounter any problems. Don't worry. Lassie took the communicator and put it into her pocket in the other dimension. She smiled and turned around to leave the number 5 investigation team with Reed. Looking at the backs of the two people leaving, Luo An touched his chin and thought for a moment. Suddenly he remembered something and began to search on the desk. Mona was a little confused when she saw Luo An's actions. What are you looking for? I'm looking for the physical examination reports of the 4 little boys made by the trace examination department. Do you know where they are? Mona turned around and moved to Reed's workstation and soon found the folder there. Here. Thank you. Taking the folder, Luo An began to carefully check the contents of the report. Mona sat aside and waited quietly until Luo An raised his eyebrows and raised the corners of his mouth. What did you find? Teeth. The teeth of these children. Luo An did not keep the secret, but directly opened the report in the folder, pointed to a part of the content and said, the trace examination department said that these 4 little boys had taken a bath, received good care, and were not sick. Except for the irreversible wound on the back, the rest of the body was healthy. Especially the teeth of these 4 children. The people in that organization spent a lot of money on them. The purpose was to make them grow a perfect set of teeth. So, we can find the dentist who performed surgery on these 4 children. Mona clapped her hands, understood what Luo An meant, patted his shoulder, and immediately turned around and started typing on the keyboard. The work of checking suspicious people one by one was very complicated, and the afternoon soon came to an end. After the agents of the number 5 investigation team went home, after get off work, they found a lot of suspicious clues at noon the next day. At the front of the number 5 investigation team's office area, Lassie was the first to come out and speak. Based on last night's investigation, I can be 100% sure that Rick Hare is heterosexual. Lassie put the guy's headshot on the whiteboard, her face full of disdain. She said that Rick had approached 3 young girls in a bar last night, but all ended in failure. After being embarrassed and angry, this guy went out and paid 3 prostitutes, but he didn't last in the hotel for less than 10 minutes. Well, Ryder, who also witnessed this scene with Lassie, grinned disdainfully. William had a slight smile on his face, but a male technical agent behind him touched his thigh calmly and took 2 steps back. Roan did not comment on this, but turned to look at Mona, who then walked out and took out another photo of middle-aged white man and pasted it on the whiteboard. This guy's called John. He is 54 years old, and he is a dentist who immigrated from South America. The 4 little boys we rescued from the villa yesterday all had their teeth corrected by this guy. Not only that, I also checked John's financial situation, and the income from his dental clinic is completely inconsistent with his daily financial situation. Good. Mona returned to her workstation, and Roan immediately turned his attention to William. William strode out, pasting photos on the whiteboard, and said, "We should have found the central organization of this, Federal Youth Hobby Association." Chapter 262 4 Umbrellas. At the front of the 5th investigation team's office, William posted 3 photos on the whiteboard. All 3 photos were of adult white males, but their ages were slightly different. The first one is Carl. William pointed to the 37-year-old, slightly bald middle-aged white man in the photo and introduced him. This guy is a surgeon in a hospital in New York. He has never been married and has 3 sons aged between 5 and 10, all of whom are adopted. We checked and found that there are some problems with his adoption certificate, and it is probably fake. Luo An wrote down the guy's name in the notebook. A doctor can effectively check the physical condition of children at any time. By the way, you can do something you like to do. Mona and others agreed with Luo An's opinion. William continued to introduce the second suspect, a middle-aged fat white man in a suit and tie with a bright smile. This guy is called Doyle. He is the owner of a travel agency called Imagine Travel. He is single and has no children. We checked the travel company. In addition to some obvious travel projects, the company also has some travel projects that require registered members to view the specific content. But how to register as a member? We haven't found a way. Lassie raised her hand when she heard this, looked at the agents and said, "I understand this. It is 100% the model of member invitation and introduction." "That's right." Luo An affirmed Lassie's guess. This method was very popular in the later generations, when the internet was developed. Some adult forums basically rely on invitation codes to enter and register. William said that they also guessed this, and then introduced the last person. This white man is very young. In the photo, he is standing on the school playground, hugging a pair of little boys playing football with a smile on his face. His name is Vincent, and he is the youngest son of our New York City deputy mayor. Well, hearing William's words, all the agents of the number 5 investigation team fell silent. Luo An turned his pen a few times and asked in a deep voice, "Do you think these 3 people are the central organizers of the Federal Youth Hobby Association in New York City? Do you have any specific evidence?" "Direct evidence is best." "No direct evidence, but we found a lot of clues." William walked back to his workstation and handed a few pieces of paper to Luo An and the other 4, saying at the same time, "Let's not talk about Carl. There is a problem with his adoption certificate. It is probably fake. Doyle's travel company mainly does business in South America, South Asia and other regions, and the annual reported income does not match the economic situation shown by Doyle himself." As for Vincent, William handed Luo An a newspaper. There was an article in the lower right corner. The content was mainly that someone revealed that the youngest son of the New York deputy mayor often invited little boys to play together. One of the parents later found that his son was not in a good state. After calling the police, he was forced to solve the problem privately. This kind of report happened every once in a while, and it never stopped. But the article was always in the corner, and no one cared about it. Even the newspaper went bankrupt some time ago. TSK, 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 it's really dark. Luo An was shocked after reading the contents. It was worthy of being a capitalist country. These guys who had the right to speak really had everything they wanted. But these are all indirect evidence. We can't apply for a search warrant. Ryder looked at the 3 little boys in the photo, who were about the same age as his son, and were adopted by Carl, and frowned. God knows what Carl had done to them. So the next goal is to find direct evidence. Luo An walked to the front of the office area, crossed his arms, and looked at the photos on the whiteboard for a while, then turned to look at everyone and said, "Lassie, you and Ryder go to the school where the 3 little boys adopted by Carl go to school. Ask the teachers and other people in that school, and see if you can get some clues. Also go to the immigration bureau." "No problem." Ryder and Lassie responded, threw the folder in their hands, and turned to leave the number 5 investigation team. Roan then looked at Mona, with a slight smile on his face. "Mona, I believe you can definitely find a way to access the website of that travel company, right?" Mona laughed, raised her right hand, and gave Roan an okay gesture. "Wait a minute." William was a little anxious and said, "Roan, you don't want Mona to hack into the internal network of that company to find evidence directly, do you? If so, the judge will determine that there is something wrong with our law enforcement procedures." Of course not. Although Roan didn't handle the follow-up of the case, he was quite familiar with the procedural justice unique to the federal government, so he smiled and explained to William and Mona, "Mona, you just need to register as a member on the website of that travel company and find out the specific business of that travel company." Mona gave Roan another okay gesture. William seemed to understand what Roan was going to do, but Roan didn't continue to explain to him, but took the folder and left the number 5 investigation team. Special Agent Supervisor's Office. "This is one of the suspects we found, sir." Luo An sat opposite Verines and placed the information about Vincent, the youngest son of the New York deputy mayor, on the other's desk. "You are very fast." Verines picked up the folder, flipped through it briefly, and then put it back on the table. The corners of her mouth slightly raised, and she handed Luo An another folder. "This Vincent is indeed one of the founders and managers of the New York Association, but he has 4 umbrellas behind him." Luo An opened the folder and found that Verines had found out more details. In addition to the New York deputy mayor, the 4 umbrellas also included a congressman, a senior member of the New York judiciary, and a director of a department of the FBI New York branch. Selectively ignoring the content of the investigation conducted by the Washington headquarters in the folder, Luo An looked up and smiled at Verines. "You are worthy of being the chief. You found out these things so easily." Verines threw a pair of beautiful sanitary balls to Luo An. She knew how she conducted the investigation. Verines took a folder from the pile of documents next to her, lowered her head, and prepared to continue working, and said, "The next thing is up to you. Remember to notify me when you start the action. I will hold a large press conference." Seeing this, Luo An narrowed his eyes and whispered, "Sir, this is a big case." "It is indeed a big case." Verines subconsciously repeated Luo An's words, and then paused for a moment, while writing with her head down. She slowly raised her head, and looked at Luo An, and her tone changed a little. "What do you mean?" "Sir, what conditions are required for the special agent director to continue to be promoted?" Luo An smiled, and leaned back tactically, crossing his legs. He was going to Los Angeles next, and he would definitely not see Verines for a while. In order to prevent Verines' favorability towards him from decreasing due to distance in the future, Luo An decided to brush Verines' favorability before leaving New York, so that she would not forget him in a short time. At the same time, doing so would also be good for Luo An himself. Chapter 263. Evidence ready. Ready to arrest. Roan didn't know the specific situation in Los Angeles, but if he had the title of having just solved a big case, he would definitely face less resistance there. As soon as Roan said this, Verines, who was not weak in political tactics, instantly understood his idea. "I was just promoted to Special Agent Director not long ago, and I can't be promoted any further in the short term. However, the greater the impact of solving the case, the greater the impact on future promotions." Verines also crossed her legs, narrowed her eyes, and said while thinking, "So, for the press conference after this case, we can actually invite more reporters from news media." Roan's mouth twitched when he heard this. Verines was obviously used to holding press conferences, and she subconsciously wanted to hold a press conference when something happened. But in fact, the role of the press conference is limited. Thinking of this, Luo An no longer kept the secret and said directly, "Sir, according to federal law, child molestation is a felony, but there are still many such incidents happening. I think as an FBI, it is necessary to tell the public about this kind of thing, so that they can strengthen their awareness of prevention and protect their children. This requires us to vigorously publicize it. Coincidentally, we just happen to have a vicious case against children. We can let the media and citizens see very clearly the determination of our FBI to crack down on this type of crime, and at the same time, severely crack down on the arrogance of criminals of the same type." Luo An said a lot of things eloquently, but in fact, only one sentence can explain it clearly: publicity, publicity, and asterisk 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 publicity. Especially since Verines is a woman, she has an innate advantage in dealing with child crimes. While letting more people see her determination to enforce the law, she can also let her accumulate a wave of qualifications within the FBI. It would be even better if a higher level officer could come out to speak and express determination and encouragement. After listening to Luo An's description, Verines easily understood the subtext of his words, and her eyes instantly became extremely bright. To be honest, what Luo An said was not complicated, nor was it anything new. Verines also knew the importance of publicity, so she held a press conference every time to answer reporters' questions. But this was 2005 after all, and the large-scale news bombing methods of later generations had not yet been particularly rampant, so Luo An's words undoubtedly opened the door to a new world for Verines. Seeing Luo An swallowing his saliva subconsciously, Verines' eyes lit up, but her face became very serious, and she said in a deep voice, "Thank you for your advice. I think your idea is very useful. The specific course of action for this case is left to you. If you have any difficulties, remember to contact me immediately. I will help you solve any problems." "Okay, sir." Seeing the satisfied light in Verines' eyes and her impatient hands, Luo An laughed, chatted briefly for a few words, and then got up and left the office. Luo An's efforts in this wave of operations were not in vain, and there was no benefit. In addition to the aforementioned, this wave of operations can reduce the resistance from Los Angeles, and Luo An can actually make a lot more money. After all, the pie has become bigger, and Luo An will definitely get more than before. I don't know how much the bonus will be after this case. Luo An took the folder and walked back to the number 5 investigation team with a smile on his face. As soon as she returned to her workstation, Mona turned to Luo An and said, "Luo An, I have successfully registered as a VIP member on the travel company's website. It cost me $200 US. Wow, it's expensive." Luo An sighed expressionlessly, then moved his chair to Mona and asked, "What are the specific details of the travel projects that only members can view?" Mona's 10 fingers flew on the keyboard, and she made a disgusted expression on her face. The travel company described it as a dream trip, but for the specific content of the trip, you need to submit an application first, and then take the application materials and personal identification documents to the office of, imagine wondering, travel company to discuss in detail with the boss. Really cautious. Luo An smacked his lips and did not let Mona submit the application now, but asked Mona to try to find all the registered members on this website. Time quickly came to the afternoon, and Lassie and Riyad also returned to the number 5 investigation team. Our Dr. Carl is a very cautious doctor, but his agent friend in the immigration bureau doesn't pay much attention to details. Lassie posted a document on the whiteboard at the front of the office area, turned around and smiled. "This is the fake visa we found at the immigration bureau. The 3 little boys adopted by Dr. Carl are all from South America. But it seems we have reason to arrest Dr. Carl." Luo An made a check mark on his notebook, then turned to look at William and other technical agents. "We mainly checked Vincent's financial situation and recent itinerary." William walked forward, posted several forms and photos on the whiteboard, and said, "The son of our deputy mayor goes to South America or South Asia several times a year, and withdraws a small amount of funds from his account each time. According to information from the Department of Homeland Security, the money eventually went into the hands of a human smuggler who transported illegal immigrants to the Federation. The amount of this money is always equal to the price of a 2 to 4-year-old child entering the Federation. Lassie crossed her arms and raised her eyebrows. In other words, Vincent is actually smuggling little boys. That's right. Luo An continued to write and draw on his notes, then looked at Mona. How is your investigation going? I have almost found all the VIP clients of that travel agency, and the list is already listed. Mona's face was full of disgust, and she added, in addition, I also found the details of this so-called dream trip in the computer of one of the VIP clients. The main content is that Imagination Travel Company leads VIP customers with needs to take a plane to South America or South Asia according to specific needs and see little boys or girls in a hotel there. After the event, if the VIP customers want to continue, they can pay to buy these children, and Imagination Travel Company will be responsible for bringing these children back to the Federation. Fouquet. Son of eating. What a bunch of asterisk asterisk asterisk. After listening to Mona's introduction, the agents of the entire number 5 investigation team cursed. In other words, the travel agency owner Doyle is responsible for contacting VIP customers and arranging itineraries. The mayor's youngest son Vincent is responsible for official relations and smuggling children. Dr. Carl is responsible for taking care of the children and examining them. Luo An quickly sorted out the division of tasks among the 3 people. The detectives from investigation team 5 all looked unhappy when they heard this. Riyad was too lazy to talk nonsense and turned to look at Luo An and asked, Luo An, what should we do next? The evidence is almost ready. Of course, we have to arrest them. Luo An closed his notebook, threw it on his desk, and sneered. But for the sake of procedural justice, this arrest operation can be a little special, such as arresting them in the act of committing crimes. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264. 1015-year-old boys are all angels. Because of the 4 umbrellas, the preparation time for this arrest operation was a little longer. After receiving the notice from Roan, Verines first went to the director of the FBI New York branch and reported the case to him. After a round of political bargaining, the outcome of the 4 umbrellas was discussed. The head of a certain department within the FBI would be internally controlled and dismissed, and the remaining 3 umbrellas would be handed over to Roan to arrest at the same time. Since there were many people who needed to be arrested, and children who needed to be rescued, and the locations were relatively scattered, Verines immediately approved a large number of temporary personnel for Roan's men, after she came out from the director of the FBI New York branch. Seeing this, Roan immediately dispersed these people, and divided them into several groups. He did not tell them what the specific action goals and tasks were, but only notified them to be ready for action at any time. Everything was ready. Augustus looked at the orderly agents who were easily managed by Roan with a smile on his face, but at the same time he was also a little emotional. Patting Roan on the shoulder, Augustus asked, I heard that you plan to conduct this operation by catching the criminal in the act. How do you plan to do it? Roan turned his eyes to Mona first. After seeing Mona stretch out her right hand and make an OK gesture, he looked at Augustus's dark face and laughed. Sir, can you also find out about the habit? Augustus. At 12 noon that day, Augustus drove a car to the downstairs of Imaginary Wandering Travel Company. At this time, Augustus was wearing a casual suit, but his pocket was not only equipped with a communicator, but also a recorder. At the same time, behind the car that Augustus stopped, there was another black van, in which sat Mona, who was responsible for computer monitoring, and a team of SWAT members. At the same time, Lassie led several teams of FBI agents, who were responsible for arresting the New York deputy mayor, a congressman, and a senior member of the judicial department. Ryder led several teams of FBI agents and SWAT members, who were responsible for arresting VIP members of this association who traveled more frequently. Luo An led 4 SWAT teams to the secret base of the Federal Youth Hobby Association, and was ready to deal with the guards here and rescue the children. All 4 groups of people arrived at the designated location. Except for Luo An and the 4 leaders, the other members still did not know the specific content of the operation. After Augustus got the specific evidence, the other multiple locations began to carry out unified operations. In the office area of the number 5 investigation team, Vereen sat on the table, staring at the operation status in William's computer and the communicator beside him. This time, Augustus needed to pretend to be a VIP customer who had just joined the travel company. After all, his appearance seemed to be more suitable for this identity in the number 5 investigation team. Augustus. After getting off the car, Augustus patted the communicator. "How is it? Can you hear it?" "Don't worry, sir." Luo An, who was fully armed on the other side of the communicator, checked the rifle in his hand and laughed. "We can even hear your breathing." "Good." Augustus bent down and took out the documents and other information prepared by Mona from the car and turned to walk towards the building of the travel company. The interior decoration of the travel company is not high profile, but warm, giving people a feeling of returning home. Because he had an appointment and was a VIP customer and was handling the hidden business of the travel company, Augustus was quickly taken to a more private office by the front desk. "Hello, you are Mr. Oval." After a while, the boss of the travel company, Doyle, smiled and pushed open the door and walked in. He has always been personally responsible for the hidden business of the travel company. "John Oval." Augustus stood up, smiled and shook hands with him, and asked, "Did you receive my application? About our special operations trip to South America, right?" "Of course I did." Doyle was a middle-aged white fat man, who looked a little like Augustus with a big belly. He smiled and answered Augustus's question, then took Augustus to his office and asked, "But before that, I have to ask, where did you know about our travel company?" "Of course, from a mutual friend of ours." Walking into Doyle's office, Augustus sat down on the chair and smiled, "But I don't want to mention anyone's name." Doyle sat in his chair and stared at Augustus. When he heard this, Augustus' expression remained unchanged, and he took out $10,000 in cash from his pocket. Doyle laughed and handed Augustus a cup of coffee. "It's okay, your personal information and credit record have passed the check." Roan had guessed this a long time ago, so he asked Mona to make a temporary genuine engineer identity for Augustus in advance. Augustus also knew this, but he still showed a surprised expression on his face. "You checked my credit record?" "Of course, this is to make sure you are the real person, and for the safety of both of us." Doyle nodded and admitted it as a matter of course, and added, "So, Mr. Oval, I need you to show your ID." "No problem." Augustus took out the ID that Mona had prepared for him in advance from his pocket and handed it to the other party, smiling. "Before coming here, I was a little worried about security issues, but now it seems that you are very professional and my friend did not lie to me. We are a professional company that absolutely cares about our customers. The needs of our customers are our needs." Doyle took a quick look at Augustus's ID and returned it to him, then smiled and looked at the computer and introduced, "Our travel time is 2 weeks, a total of 14 days, round-trip business class, and you will also stay in a business hotel. The $10,000 fare includes travel expenses, food, drink, and entertainment. Is that okay?" Augustus nodded with a smile on his face. "The entertainment is." Doyle crossed his arms. "Do you like boys or girls, or all of them?" Augustus patted his big belly, gave Doyle a look, and said with a smile, "Girls are boring. I only like boys aged 10 to 15. They are angels, aren't they?" "Of course, no problem." Doyle saw the look Augustus gave him, and his smile became even wider. "I agree with you, and don't worry, we have cooperation with the local orphanage, and the youngest is 5 years old. You may be able to try out the new world, and you can also take a video as a souvenir. We can help you bring the video to the Federation later. This is an additional service, free of charge." "Great." Augustus nodded repeatedly after hearing this, indicating that he was very satisfied, and then handed the $10,000 to the other party. "This is the full amount. You can check it. I don't want to leave any written records." Taking the $10,000, Doyle looked at the computer on the desktop with a smile and asked, "What are you planning to do? Do you need to change your name when buying the plane ticket?" "I want to use the name Augustus, and I also hope you call me FBI." Augustus took out the golden badge of the FBI from his pocket, and the smile on his face disappeared instantly. "Stand up. Put your hands behind your back." Fouquet. Doyle was stunned for a moment, and then he cursed. "Damn it, you are inducing law enforcement." "No, federal law calls this conspiracy." Mona rushed in with a team of SWAT members. At the same time, Roan, Lassie, Reed and others in the distance also began to act. Plastic bomb. Blow it up. Chapter 265. The troops are divided into N groups and the operation is successful. When Augustus called out the FBI, Roan immediately shouted in the communicator, "Begin the action." Received. X2. As soon as the voice fell, Lassie immediately issued the mission target to the agents behind him, and then divided the troops into several groups, and began to act. After receiving the order, Ryder immediately issued the more important customer lists and arrest warrants for home address personal information among the VIPs to the SWAT team members, and led them to quickly arrest people. The same is true for OWN, the base of the Federal Youth Hobby Association, responsible for taking care of the little boys. A row of townhouses, located in a more remote area of Long Island. The decoration of these townhouses is the same as the villa that was broken into when arresting Facundo Hunter before. The doors are all made of solid wood plus steel plates. Not only that, there are guards outside the townhouses here, and each guard has a rifle. After giving the order to Lassie and Ryder, Roan pressed the other communicator responsible for contacting the 5 SWAT teams in this area and shouted, "Attention all teams, approach the villa, surround and guard the point in teams. If you encounter armed resistance from non-police personnel, you are allowed to shoot to death. Repeat, you are allowed to shoot to death." Understood. The order was officially issued, and the 5 SWAT teams immediately surrounded the villas they were responsible for, and soon exchanged fire with the guards of the villas. Bang, 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 boom. FBI. The enemy has a rifle. Left. Watch the left. Speed. Speed. The guards of the villas were not few, but they were no match for the fully armed SWAT team members, so it didn't take long for the SWAT team members to reach the gates of their respective target villas. Bang, bang. The same thing happened to the SWAT team number 4 led by Luo An. They rushed into the villa at a very fast speed like ghosts. Luo An shot 2 guards in the head with 2 shots. At the same time, a SWAT team member attached a thickened special plastic bomb to the door of the villa. Luo An did not hesitate and said sternly, "Blow it up." Boom. 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 As Luo An's voice fell, the SWAT team members of the number 4 team immediately used the starter. At the same time, the other 4 teams also used plastic bombs to blow up the door of the villa at almost the same time. A deafening explosion sounded throughout the villa area, and bright flames and black smoke burst out at the same time. Luo An led the SWAT team members and immediately stepped on the fallen special door and broke into the villa. As expected, there were several armed guards in the villa. Bang, bang, bang. Seeing the SWAT team members breaking into the villa, the guards immediately hid in the room on the 2nd floor and fired bullets at the main door on the 1st floor of the villa. Dodge. Dodge. Move to the right. Several SWAT members subconsciously looked for obstacles to dodge, and Roan quickly moved towards the stairs the second before the bullet hit him. Roan's speed was like a ghost. Before the guards could react, he ran to the stairs on the 2nd floor. One of the guards' rooms was facing the stairs. The moment Roan ran up, he happened to meet his eyes and saw him very clearly. Roan grinned, revealing his white teeth. "Shit, there's..." Seeing the smile on Roan's face, the guard's heart jumped, and he quickly raised his rifle and prepared to call his teammates to attack Roan together. But Roan didn't give him a chance to finish his words. The second the other party was about to move his rifle, Roan raised his Glock 18 and pulled the trigger at this guy. Bang, bang, bang. 2 shots to the chest and 1 shot to the head. The guard, who hadn't finished his last words, closed his eyes and fell backwards to the ground. Fouquet. The enemy is coming up. What? How did they get up here? Hearing the gunshots from the side and seeing their teammates lying in a pool of blood, the remaining guards were shocked and cursed. They raised their weapons and prepared to shoot at the staircase where Luo An was. But the SWAT team members downstairs had already found their respective hiding places. While some of them quickly moved to the stairs, the other part fired at the rooms on the 2nd floor to suppress the guards. Bang, bang, bang. The guards were suppressed in their respective rooms by bullets. Luo An took a leisurely look and took out several stun grenades from his pocket. I like fairness, one for each person. Luo An raised his lips slightly and threw the gifts he brought to the guards' rooms. Boom. 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 A dazzling white light lit up, and Luo An and the two SWAT team members immediately split into two sides and moved towards several rooms. Without hesitation, they pulled the trigger at the guards inside the room who didn't see who was coming. Bang, bang, bang. With several gunshots, several guards fell to the ground. Damn FBI. At this moment, the last guard who successfully avoided the stun grenade saw the trembling little boy hiding in the corner of the room. The guard's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly pulled the little boy into his arms, then pointed the gun at the little boy's head and shouted, FBI. I have. Bang. Before the guard finished speaking, a bloody hole appeared in the center of his forehead, and then he fell backwards with hope in his eyes and astonishment on his face. The captured little boy looked at Luo An, who appeared in front of him with a pistol in his hand with a face full of shock. He didn't see clearly how the other party appeared in front of him just now. The eyes of several SWAT members were also full of shock. They only felt Luo An's figure flash, and the guard was shot and fell to the ground. The sound of someone falling behind him made the little boy subconsciously want to look back. Luo An put away his Glock 18 and put his hand in front of the little boy to stop him from looking back. No need to look. That uncle has gone to talk to God. The blindfolded little boy twitched his mouth. He was not a little guy of 4 or 5 years old who knew nothing. At the age of 10, he already understood what Luo An meant. However, the little boy did not intend to break free from Roan's hands. Instead, he followed Roan out of the villa and asked, "Thank you, uncle. Can you tell me your name? Just call me brother. I'm not that old." After handing over the matters in the villa to the SWAT team members, Roan walked out of the villa. At the same time, the communicator on his chest rang. Villa number 1 and villa number 5, cleared. Villa number 2 and villa number 3, cleared. Roan's mouth curled up slightly. Villa number 4 has been cleared. Thank you for your hard work. After briefly talking to the captains of several SWAT teams and learning that there were no casualties, but only 2 scratches, Roan asked the ambulance to come here quickly and then pressed another communicator. "Lassie, Riyadh, how are you doing over there?" Lassie looked at a senior leader of the judicial system who was locked in the car and laughed. The mission was a complete success. On the other side, looking at the white lawyer who was pressed into the car by FBI agents and yelled for a lawyer, Riyadh grinned. "I was also successful here. Everyone on the list was caught. Well done." After hearing what Riyadh said, it was not Luo An who said this, but Verines, who had been sitting in the number 5 investigation team waiting for news. William saw Verines with a smile on her face, got up from her seat, and said to the communicator, "Thank you for your hard work on this operation." Because of Luo An's previous suggestion, Verines used some means to publicize a wave of child crimes last night. Not only will she attend the press conference today, but the director and deputy director of the FBI New York branch will also attend. Not only that, after the press conference, there will be a large-scale publicity. Luo An was about to speak, and Verines on the other end of the phone immediately pressed the private contact channel and added, "Luo An, come to my office after the press conference. Come alone." Luo An. Chapter 266 Special Investigation Team. Jacob Federal Building. In a large conference room, Verines, wearing a women's suit, described the case loudly in front of dozens of reporters. "In this operation, we successfully destroyed an evil organization that targeted children in New York City and successfully rescued a large number of children who were abused by criminals. This is the largest and most successful operation of our FBI New York branch against child sexual abuse crimes." Verines' voice fell, and reporters from major media in New York stood up with microphones. "Madam Special Agent in charge, can you explain the process of this operation in detail? It is said that the deputy mayor of New York City was also taken back to the Jacob Federal Building by you. What does this case have to do with him?" "Ms. Verines, what's the matter with the leader of the judicial department who was taken away by you? Is he also a homosexual?" Looking at these crying reporters in front of her, Verines raised the corner of her mouth slightly. "Don't worry, come one by one. Investigation team number 5, interrogation area." I said, "I would never have sex with an underage boy." A thin and bald middle-aged white man shouted loudly, "You FBI are slandering my character." "Then what about the videotape found in your safe?" Reed was full of disdain and pushed the bald white man into the temporary detention area. "You should think about how to get your lawyer to prove that you in the videotape are not you." On the other side, Lassie held a folder and said loudly, "This time, we not only captured the 3 organizers of the Federal Youth Hobby Association in New York, but also successfully captured 38 perverts with relatively high social status. Among them are teachers, court clerks, engineers, lawyers, Wall Street stock experts." Mona next to her asked, "Where are the children? How many have been rescued in total?" "There are 19 in the New York area, and we don't know about the number abroad yet. The local government is investigating those children's welfare homes." Lassie flipped through the records in her hand and continued, "The New York Child Welfare Bureau is helping these children move into temporary foster families." Mona was about to ask something, but Ron patted her on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't forget one more important thing. That is, how is the murderer of Ansel Ward Jr. doing now? After all, the root of the initial investigation of this big case was to find the murderer of Ansel." Mona slapped her head when she heard it and hurried back to her workstation. After searching on the desktop for a while, she took out a piece of paper and handed it to Roan. According to the interrogation record of Doyle, the boss of the travel company, the guy who bought Ansel Ward Jr. is named Lewis, a surgeon, and has been caught by us. Great. Roan took the file and found that the FBI agents led by Reed found a lot of photos of Ansel Ward Jr. in this guy's home and a small freezer in the basement. After thinking for a while, Luo An added, "Don't forget to ask the trace examination department to go to the surgeon's home to search for evidence carefully. We must nail this pervert down and let him experience the wonderful life of a homosexual in prison. I have asked the trace examination department to investigate." At this time, Augustus came over, patted Luo An's arm, and said with a smile, "Well done, Luo An. This operation process is really great. It's the result of everyone's joint efforts." Luo An replied with a smile. Augustus, who had just returned from the press conference, was a little moved when he heard this. After all, Luo An was leaving New York for Los Angeles. However, Augustus also knew what Luo An was going to Los Angeles for this time, so he patted Luo An's arm again and grinned. "The press conference is over. Verinoth has something to ask you. You should hurry to her office." "Okay." Thinking of what Verinoth emphasized on the phone before, Luo An's heart skipped a beat, but his face did not change. He nodded and smiled and left the number 5 investigation team. Special Agent Director's office. Dang. 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 "Come in." When Luo An entered the office, Verines did not sit on the chair as usual, but faced the window to make a call. She gave Luo An a look to let him sit down first. Verines did not hide the process of the call from Luo An. The overall content was that more than a dozen large, medium and small media in New York would work together to report on this case, striving to let the citizens of New York know that the FBI had cracked a major case against children. Of course, Verines herself certainly did not have such energy, but at the press conference just now, the director of the FBI New York branch also attended and briefly explained the case and praised Verines and the investigation team in charge of this case. A few minutes later, the call was finally over. Verines turned around and looked at Luo An with a smile in her eyes. "Luo An, I'm very satisfied with the gift you gave me before leaving New York." "Thank you." Verines guessed Luo An's thoughts after a little thought and was happy and relieved that she did not make a mistake. "This is what I should do, sir." Luo An laughed. He was lucky to meet Verines after joining the FBI. It was not easy to find a superior who was smart, had a good background, and was willing to give his subordinates opportunities. He must hold on to those long, white thighs tightly and never let others pry them away. Verines smiled even more when she heard Luo An's words. She raised her coffee to Luo An. Luo An also raised his coffee and smiled at Verines, then drank it together. "The main reason I asked you to come to the office this time is that I have secured an opportunity for you." The two put down their coffee, and Verines did not keep them in suspense, but directly handed Luo An a document. Luo An opened the folder and found that the contents inside were actually from the FBI Washington headquarters. With the rapid development of the federal cyber world, the way our FBI investigates cases also needs to be rectified. Verines picked up the coffee beside her and refilled it for herself and Luo An, saying, "In the past, when investigating a case, sometimes we need to contact other departments, but it is not only time consuming and laborious, but sometimes other departments refuse to cooperate. Our own internal personnel in the FBI are also redundant, and occasionally there are situations where they drag their feet." Luo An's eyes lit up slightly when he heard this. He remembered the streamlined organizational structure of some departments in the FBI in the future. As expected, Verines immediately said that the Washington headquarters decided to set up 10 special investigation teams with streamlined personnel and judge whether reforms can be carried out based on their performance in daily work. Verines successfully asked for a quota for an investigation team for the Los Angeles branch that Luo An was going to. In the future work process, the personnel structure of this investigation team will not exceed 7 people, one of whom is specifically responsible for contacting staff from other law enforcement departments, and the specific law enforcement content is not fixed and is decided by the leader of the investigation team. Generally speaking, this kind of investigation team has few people, and they can handle any case they want, and the team leader has the final say. Wow. Luo An raised his eyebrows and looked at Verines. "Then who is the team leader of this investigation team I joined?" "No team leader yet." Verines leaned back tactically, crossed her legs, looked at Luo An and smiled softly. "And according to the regulations, when there is no team leader, the deputy team leader will act as the team leader." Chapter 267 Case Conclusion Hollywood Cult Dinner. Hearing Verines' words and seeing the smile on her face, Deputy Team Leader Luo An also grinned. However, some questions still need to be asked in advance. What about the members of this investigation team? The team leader decides on the recruitment. What about the funds for the investigation team? It is directly allocated by the local FBI branch finance department. After asking several questions in a row, Deputy Team Leader Luo An smiled brightly and closed the folder. "Thank you, sir. I will definitely not let you down. I believe in you." Verines nodded. She trusted Luo An very much in solving the case. However, Luo An would take on the responsibilities of the investigation team leader in the future, so Verines simply explained to him some of the problems he might encounter in the future, as well as the corresponding solutions. Luo An carefully memorized it in his mind. This kind of knowledge is more important than solving a case. After all, those who hold guns cannot beat those who hold politics. Seeing Luo An's serious listening attitude, Verines was even more satisfied. She said that she would call her in time if she encountered any problems in the future. Finally, she added, "After all, these 10 special investigation teams were set up by the Washington headquarters in 10 major cities within the federal territory. So as long as they perform well, it may take less than a year to be transferred to other cities again." "I understand, sir." Luo An patted the folder in his arms after hearing this, and then smiled and raised the coffee cup in his hand to Verines. Verines also raised the corner of her mouth and raised the coffee cup in her hand again. The sun shone into the office through the glass. The air was a little hot, but the hearts of the two were even hotter. Leaving Verines' office, Luo An walked in the corridor with the folder, thinking as he walked, the personnel structure of this special investigation team cannot exceed 7 people, and one of them is a guy who is specifically responsible for contacting other law enforcement departments. Counting himself, Mona and Lassie, Luo An can actually recruit only 3 people. Luo An is the team leader, deputy team leader, responsible for commanding the overall situation. Mona's skills are all in computers, so she can be responsible for computer-related technical work such as checking information and monitoring. Lassie's skills are in disguising her identity and searching for clues. The difference is that Lassie is good at finding clues offline, and her success rate is extremely high. Therefore, she can be responsible for exploring the suspect's interpersonal relationships offline in the future, as well as disguise and role-playing work suitable for women. So, what specialties do the remaining 3 people need? Luo An walked into the elevator with a folder, feeling a little headache. Back to the number 5 investigation team. It was still a bit chaotic at this time. There was no way. There were too many people arrested at one time this time. Although Verines also sent other investigation teams to help temporarily, it was still impossible to completely solve it for a while. However, these still had nothing to do with Luo An. He handed the folder he got from Verines to Mona and Lassie. Just after explaining it carefully, he was called to his office by Augustus and got 2 folders. In one of the folders was a notice on the bonus for the murder of Dr. Flavia Fran, with each of the agents in Investigation Team 5 receiving $2,000 and Roan receiving $4,000. Seeing the smile on Roan's face, Augustus couldn't help but sigh. After Roan left for Los Angeles, the monthly salary of the agents in Investigation Team 5 would definitely drop significantly, and he, the team leader, was no exception. Augustus patted his big belly and decided to go to Dylan's place for a drink after get off work, just like he did before Roan came to Investigation Team 5. Dylan? He opened the second folder, and the content inside was somewhat beyond Roan's expectations, because it contained an interrogation record. This is the interrogation record of Vincent, the youngest son of the New York deputy mayor. When you went to Verine's place, Lassie and I had already finished interrogating him. Augustus stood up with a serious expression on his face. According to Vincent, he joined the Federal Youth Hobby Association when he was studying at the University of Southern California. In addition to him, many classmates also joined this association. The University of Southern California. Looking at the text in front of him, Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly. The University of California, also translated as the University of Southern California, abbreviated as USC, was founded by the Board of Regents in 1880. It is the oldest private research university on the west coast of the Federation and a world-renowned institution of higher learning. The focus is not on the history of this school, but on the geographical location of this school in Los Angeles. The Federal Youth Hobby Association was originally established in San Francisco, where there is still a mailbox for this organization, to receive money from others. The distance between San Francisco and Los Angeles is only 6 hours by car, and only 1 hour by plane. Thinking of some news from his previous life, Luo An looked up and asked, "Sir, there seem to be quite a few cults in Los Angeles or Hollywood, right?" "That's right." Augustus nodded. There are too many rich people and celebrities in places like Hollywood, so they are naturally the targets of cults. So there are countless cults there, and the types are even more varied, with all kinds of weird doctrines. More importantly, although those celebrities look glamorous on the outside, they are actually very insecure. The industry is very stressful, and they often feel that their talents do not match their reputations. Cults can easily give them a sense of belonging and a meaning of life beyond their careers. TSK. Luo An shook his head, closed the folder, and smiled. "Thank you, sir. When I'm in Los Angeles, I will pay more attention to this association composed of perverts." "That's good." Augustus leaned back. The New York branch of this organization was hit so hard by Luo An and his men this time. It is impossible for the guys in the headquarters of this organization not to hate the FBI, so Augustus deliberately warned Luo An to be more careful in the future. The two chatted briefly for a while, and then Luo An got up and left to return to his workstation. Time soon came to the end of get-off work time. The 2 cases had been solved, and there was no need to work overtime, so the agents of the number 5 investigation team all went to the Blue Tuna Grill restaurant not far from the Jacob building. Cheers. The agents raised their glasses and cheered loudly. After drinking this glass of wine, Augustus raised his glass again and proposed loudly, "Everyone, let's toast to Deputy Team Leader Luo An." Hearing Augustus calling Luo An Deputy Team Leader, all the agents at the table understood what he meant. After all, everyone knew that Luo An and the other 2 would go to Los Angeles in a few days. Cheers to Luo An. "Thank you." Luo An raised his glass to indicate. The atmosphere of the party cooled down a little after the glasses fell, but as Luo An and Lassie took the initiative to joke, laughter soon rang out again at the table. Because they had to go to work tomorrow to deal with the follow-up of this case, the banquet ended quickly, and the agents drove their cars back to their homes. But what surprised Luo An was that Lassie did not disappear with a waitress during the party, but squeezed into Luo An and Mona's car after the party. Mona. Luo An. Tomorrow I will start a new case in Los Angeles. I wonder if you have any suggestions for the new detectives, such as specialties. Chapter 268 Talent Lassie Roan System New Harvest. In the parking lot of the restaurant, the atmosphere in a Chevrolet was a little weird. Luo An sat in the driver's seat, looking at Lassie, who suddenly broke into the back seat with a confused look on his face. Mona, who was sitting in the passenger seat, was also a little confused, but she was not panicked. She was quite relieved by Lassie's performance on weekdays. Don't get me wrong. Seeing Luo An's eyes, Lassie waved her hands and said, I just want to ask a question and leave after asking. There are girls waiting for me. Okay. Luo An turned around and changed to a more comfortable posture. What's the question? About investment. Lassie rubbed her hands and smiled, saying that she had saved more than $300,000 recently and wanted to buy some stocks that could be held for a long time. So she came to Luo An to ask for advice. You saved more than $300,000? Before Luo An could say anything, Mona turned around and asked in surprise, how did you get all this money? Of course it was thanks to your Luo An. Lassie laughed and said that since Luo An joined the number 5 investigation team and solved the first case, she has been saving the bonuses issued after each case and the monthly salary and basically never spent it. What's more, she also received tens of thousands of dollars after the previous Los Angeles bombing. It's impossible to have so much money. Mona shook her head repeatedly. She was also a beneficiary, but she had not saved so much money until now, even though she lived frugally, not to mention that Lassie did not return home every night and went to various bars and parties after get off work every day. Hearing Mona's question, Lassie stood up with her hands on her hips, her face full of pride. Do you think I will spend money when I go to the bar? Lassie said that when she went to the bar and hotel, she always used her superb oral and finger skills to make the other party spend money for her, and occasionally she could even let those entertainment venues opened by female bosses give her a free bill. Not only that, Lassie said she didn't have the pressure of rent because the landlord was in his 40s and she took him down in a week. So Lassie's actual daily expenses were only for food, but she usually got a breakfast from others, or didn't eat it at all, and usually went to the bar for dinner, so the real expenses were only lunch. Mona was dumbfounded when she saw Lassie, who was smug in the backseat of the car. Luo An also widened his eyes, and after a long silence, he raised his right hand and gave Lassie a thumbs up. You are really a talent. Ha ha ha. Lassie looked up and laughed. I think I'm a talent too. However, the stock market has risks, and investment needs to be cautious. After Luo An told Lassie about the 3 companies he invested in, he repeatedly emphasized that she must not invest all her money in the stock market and could only invest half at most. 300,000 seems a lot, but it is only a small leak in a place like Wall Street. Okay, I'll keep your advice in mind. Lassie happily took the note from Luo An. Tonight was another sleepless night for her. However, Lassie said that she had actually restrained herself a lot recently. She was no longer out all night 6 out of 7 days a week. Now it was only 5 days. There was no way. She was getting old. Touching the corners of her eyes, Lassie sighed. She was already a woman in her 40s. Mona and Luo An were about to say something when they saw this. The next second, the sadness on Lassie's face disappeared instantly. She pushed open the car door and ran out of the car, smiling and saying, but, at this age, we should enjoy life while we can, right? What's more, we can save money. After that, Lassie shook the note to express her gratitude to Luo An, then turned and ran to the edge of the parking lot, where a girl was waiting for her. Looking at the figure in the distance, who was hugging and laughing with the girl, Luo An's face twitched, and he didn't know what to say. After fastening her seatbelt and stepping on the accelerator to drive the Chevrolet out of the parking lot, Luo An turned her eyes to Mona because the air pressure in the passenger seat was a little low. What's wrong? I'm so stupid, really. Mona leaned against the car window and looked out the window, whispering, I didn't expect Lassie to have saved so much money. Mona had always thought that Lassie was just like her, a moonlighter who spent tomorrow's money today. Unexpectedly, her best sister stabbed her in the back. But didn't you buy a small apartment? Luo An was speechless when she saw this. Mona actually made a lot of money, but she was just short of money to buy that apartment. Luo An's comfort had no effect, and Mona was still grey. The jokes that he always said couldn't make Mona laugh. At this time, the Chevrolet had arrived at the bottom of the apartment building. Luo An was too lazy to continue talking nonsense. After parking the car, he directly carried Mona out of the passenger seat and said viciously, "It's no big deal. I will make you hundreds of millions tonight, Mona." After a million words, Mona successfully fell asleep, and Luo An walked into the bathroom unsteadily. After pressing the switch to start the shower, Luo An opened the system page in his mind, took out a bottle of physical potion and drank it. After solving the AIDS case before, the system gave Luo An an excellent evaluation, and the 4 treasure chests opened were Physical Potions X1, Danger Sense Potions X2, and Sensitive Potions X1. After solving the case of the Federal Youth Hobby Association, the system gave Luo An an extremely excellent evaluation, and the 5 treasure chests opened were Analgesics X2, Aqualung Potions X1, Sleep Potions X1, and Swiftness Potions X1. At this time, Luo An's system warehouse page has Hemostatic Potion X5, Antidotes Potion X3, Swiftness Potion X2, Strength Potion X2, Sensitivity Potion X2, Analgesic Potion X4, Featherfall Potion X2, Stamina Potion X2, Sleep Potion X2, Aqualung Potion X2, Weakness Potion X1, Danger Sense Potion X2. As usual, he rinsed his mouth with a bottle of Stamina Potion after meals every day, and after drinking the 2 bottles of Danger Sense Potion, Luo An found that he seemed to have changed in other aspects. In the past, when a dangerous situation suddenly occurred, Luo An would feel a warning before the danger occurred. Although Luo An was a little uncomfortable with the feeling of a fire under his butt, it was a life-saving existence after all. After drinking 2 bottles of Danger Sense Potion, this time, Luo An found that he could not only receive early warnings when encountering danger, but also under normal circumstances. When facing other people, Luo An could faintly feel the attitude of others towards him from nowhere. For example, when facing Mona, Ron felt very comfortable. When facing Lassie, Augustus, Reid and others, Ron could also feel a sense of warmth. When facing those guys he had captured, as long as Ron's mind moved slightly, a cold malice suddenly came to his face. Not only that, when taking the elevator in the Jacob Federal building, sometimes when he met some passers-by who were not very familiar with him, Ron could also faintly feel their attitude towards him. Because everyone has many emotions, admiration, jealousy, curiosity, etc. are too complicated. Ron can't figure out what the other person thinks when he sees him. However, Ron can still easily distinguish between the cold malice and the warm goodwill. "So, I have an extra teammate enemy identifier." Ron grinned in the water and began to be a little curious about his life after going to Los Angeles. Chapter 269 Luo An, Los Angeles, Here I Come. However, even though he could sense other people's attitudes towards him, Luo An did not want to rely on it completely. Because people's thoughts are too complicated. Some people may be really nice to you, and their thoughts in their minds are also for your good, but their actual actions are seriously hurting you. In this case, the emotional feelings in the mind cannot be correctly distinguished. Therefore, for his new ability, Luo An only intends to use it as a tool to assist himself, not a reliance. A month sounds like a long time, but when Luo An and his 4 friends returned from Los Angeles, it was already around the 10th of the month. After returning, they encountered another serial murder case where all the penises were cut off, and 2 murders at the garbage dump. So in less than a week, before the detectives of the 5th investigation team had finished handling the follow-up of the Federal Youth Hobby Association case, Luo An, Lassie, and Mona had to go to Los Angeles. As for their apartment, Luo An and Mona had no intention of renting it out, so during these few days, the 2 found a company that specializes in such cases and asked them to help take care of it for the next year. Because of their FBI identities, the company specially upgraded Ron and Mona to VIP customers for free. Ron left the Chevrolet in the garage in New York It was not realistic to drive it all the way from New York to Los Angeles because it would take too long. The shipping price was too expensive. Several $1,000s was not worth it. So Roan planned to spend $100,000 to buy a new car. After arriving in Los Angeles, at the airport, Roan, Mona, and Lassie were saying goodbye to August, Riyadh, and other agents from the 5th investigation team. "Thank you for your care during this time, sir." Roan hugged Augustus, then turned to hug Riyadh and patted each other's backs vigorously. "Thank you also, Riyadh, for your help during this time. We should be the ones thanking you." Roan's strong slap made Riyadh feel that his blood was about to be slapped out. He quickly pushed Roan away from his arms and said with a smile, "Remember to call us when you get to Los Angeles. When we have a holiday, Ivan and I will go there for vacation. Don't worry, I will treat you to barbecue then." Roan laughed and turned to continue to greet Augustus. Lassie and Mona were also chatting with William and others nearby. Soon it was time to board the plane. Everyone stopped talking. After hugging and waving again, Roan and the other two turned and walked deep into the airport. Augustus was very moved when he watched Roan gradually disappear. He initially thought that Roan would be the one to take over his position as the leader of the number 5 investigation team in the future. But now Luo An has become the deputy leader of one of the 10 special investigation teams. When the two meet again in the future, Luo An may be on the same level as himself. It's good to be young. Augustus patted his big belly and sighed in a low voice, then turned to look at Riyadh, William and other agents beside him, and said loudly, "Let's go back to the 5th investigation team. The follow-up of the association's case has not been handled yet. When it is handled, the bonus will be issued." The agents of the 5th investigation team, when they thought that after today, the salary they can get every month will most likely return to the original level, the faces of the agents suddenly became bitter. In the distant Jacob Federal building, Vereen sat in her office and looked at the time. She smiled slightly when she thought of something and then continued to lower her head to deal with the documents at hand. The plane quickly climbed into the sky. Mona and Lassie sat together, holding a magazine and muttering something in a low voice. Luo An drank a sip of coffee, looking at the scenery outside the window, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. "Los Angeles, here I come." There was no mid-air hijacking incident as expected. Roan and his two companions arrived in Los Angeles safely. As soon as he walked out of the airport, Roan saw several white people in suits talking together in the parking lot. One of them was a middle-aged white man with a serious face, a short beard and a straight body. He stood in the middle. When he saw Roan and his two companions, he immediately raised his hand and said loudly, "This way." Seeing the face of the middle-aged white man, Roan narrowed his eyes slightly. The person who came was Roan Greenwood's teacher at the FBI Training Academy, the team leader of the Criminal Investigation Division of the FBI Los Angeles branch, Potent Burn. Giving Mona and Lassie a look, Roan quickly walked over, smiled and stretched out his hand to shake Potent Burn. "Hello, teacher. I will learn from you again in the future." While speaking, Roan's mind moved slightly, opening up the emotional feelings in his mind, and then he felt a feeling that was neither warm nor cold. Roan's expression did not change. After all, the two had not seen each other for a long time, and there was no interest connection. It was normal to have a lukewarm attitude. If the other person gives him a very warm feeling, Roan will pay more attention. "Yeah." Potent Burn stretched out his hand and shook Roan's hand, patted his arm, and without saying anything polite, he pointed to the car next to him and said, "Roan, get in one car with me, and the rest of you get in another car." "Okay, sir." The dark SUV left the airport parking lot and merged into the traffic. Potent Burn, who was sitting in the back seat with Roan, took out a cigarette from his pocket and handed it to Roan. Roan took it with a smile, but did not smoke. "Thank you, sir." Potent Burn did not care. After lighting the cigarette, he opened the car window and was silent for a few seconds. He turned around and said, "To be honest, Roan, many people here don't like you." Roan's expression did not change, and he laughed. "I'm not a dollar, so I definitely can't make everyone like me." The quota for this special investigation team was originally from the Los Angeles branch, but it was taken away by a guy from New York like himself. Roan knew with his ass that many people in the Los Angeles branch must be unhappy with him. But so what? Within the scope of the rules, Roan is confident that he can suppress those people's dissatisfaction. As for outside the scope of the rules, Roan said that he has never forgotten his killer skills. After hearing Roan's words and seeing the confident look on his face, Potent Burn took a puff of cigarette, his expression unchanged, and he was a little satisfied with Roan in his heart. Potent Burn had seen Roan's performance in the internal materials before, but he had been on the verge of death for many years and was skeptical about everything. In addition, he did not have much impression of Roan Greenwood in his mind, so he came here to observe Roan this time. At present, Roan gave him a good impression. Roan's expression remained the same, and the emotional feelings in his mind made him realize that the other party's attitude towards him was a little warmer. Here are the keys to your special investigation team's office, the vehicle keys, and the case handling funds, etc. The car soon arrived at the hotel that the FBI Los Angeles branch had rented for the 3 people. After the 3 people got off the car, Potent Burn handed Roan a folder and said expressionlessly, "You have 3 days to rest, and you must appear in that office after 3 days. After that, Potent Burn led the convoy to leave the hotel. What a cold guy. Lassie pouted, turned around and walked into the hotel with her luggage. Roan, can I move freely during these 3 days? Remember not to be late after 3 days. Okay. After tidying up the hotel room, Lassie disappeared, and Roan prepared to take Mona to buy a car first, and then go to dinner. They planned to spend these 3 days well. But soon, the City of Angels Los Angeles gave them a big surprise. Chapter 270 The female knight suddenly faces crisis. The City of Angels, Los Angeles. As the world-renowned movie mecca of Hollywood, Los Angeles is never short of luxury goods and has a wide range of services. Traveling in this huge city of Los Angeles is inseparable from cars, so after Roan and Mona simply packed up at the hotel, they went to a 4S store not far away. What car are you going to change this time? On the way to the 4S store, Mona, dressed in a cool vacation outfit, asked as she walked with an ice cream. The sun in Los Angeles is too abundant, so Mona decided to buy more sunscreen products later. Roan, who was walking beside Mona, finished the ice cream in his hand in a few bites and replied, "You know, I drove a Chevrolet in New York." Mona nodded and followed his words to check out several new Chevrolets not far away. Unexpectedly, Roan took a deep breath and continued, "So, I'm a little tired of driving Chevrolet, and I plan to change to a Porsche this time." Mona stopped walking when she heard this, narrowed her eyes, and stared at Roan. What does tired of driving mean? Seeing this, Luo An reacted quickly and hurriedly put his arm around Mona, laughing softly. "It's just about the car. Mona, you know me, which night I don't concentrate and work hard?" With a blank look at Luo An, Mona knew that Luo An was talking about the car, and also knew his attitude towards her. But as a smart woman, sometimes you still need to knock a man appropriately to prevent him from having some evil thoughts. The Chevrolet that Luo An drove when he was in New York was given to him by someone else, so this was actually Luo An's first time buying a car. However, as mentioned earlier, Hollywood is a world famous place. There are too many guys who quickly become millionaires every year because of movies or other reasons. The first thing these newly rich people do after they have money is to buy. Therefore, most of the stores in this area of Los Angeles have good service, and the attitude of the service staff is also good. No one will go against money. Although Luo An and Mona were wearing cheap holiday clothes, they did not encounter the kind of waiters who came up to slap them in the face. So Luo An quickly spent $140,000 to pick up a Porsche, and the other party handled all the matters of the car while drinking a cup of tea. Buzz. Opening the car door and sitting in the driver's seat, Luo An touched the control panel, inserted the key into the starter, and the brand new Porsche suddenly made a roar. As expected, no matter what era, the sound of the new car's airwaves is so exciting. The silver car swayed into the road, and the wind slid in through the half-open window, blowing Luo An and Mona's hair diagonally, making people feel very happy. More than 2 hours later, Mona also bought a car, but the car she bought was just an ordinary second-hand car, and the amount she spent was less than $5,000. During this period, Mona refused Luo An's gift of a new car. Mona still regarded herself and Luo An as two independent individuals at this time. Many years of independent life also made Mona not want to develop a habit of relying on Luo An. So the house they rented in Los Angeles this time also has 2 bedrooms, and the rent is AA, so everyone has their own private space. Luo An had no choice but to respect Mona's independent attitude. At 8:30 in the evening, Luo An changed into a suit, Mona changed into a red dress, and drove a Porsche to a high-end restaurant in Los Angeles. After eating 2 steaks, 2 boxes of caviar, some other meals and fruits, Luo An drove Mona to a mountain road near the sea in Los Angeles. Looking down along this road, you can just overlook half of Los Angeles and the ocean with twinkling lights in the distance. It's really the city of angels. Luo An got out of the car and stretched his waist in the warm evening breeze, while Mona looked at the beautiful scenery in a daze. The breeze blew, and Mona's red dress fluttered slightly. Coupled with her curvy figure and delicate face, Luo An's heart suddenly became hot. Walking behind Mona, stretching out his arms to hug her, Roan whispered in her ear, "Mona, you are like an angel now." "Thank you." The smile on Mona's face was as brilliant as fireworks. She grabbed the hand that had moved to her chest at some point, turned around, and pushed Roan down on the hood of the Porsche. The expression on Mona's face gradually became arrogant. "You know, angels may not ride horses, but I can." Wow. The scene here at this moment was very similar to the scene when the male and female protagonists kissed on the hood of Bumblebee at the end of Transformers 1. Roan's mouth corners raised, and his hands folded behind his head. "Then let me see the style of a female knight." A sly smile flashed in Mona's eyes, and she pulled Roan's tie on her chest and lowered her head to kiss him. Time passed by minute, and the air on the hood of the Porsche became hotter and hotter. They were about to start their meal, but at this moment, the roar of a sports car suddenly rushed here from a distance. "Fouquet." Mona on the hood of the Porsche jumped out of the car and sorted out her clothes. Luo An also stood up quickly and cursed. Luo An was very angry at this time. While sorting out his clothes quickly, his eyes full of anger stared at the direction where the sound of the sports car came from. He wanted to see who was bothering him. He must have a good chat with the other party if he had the chance in the future. In a few seconds, Luo An saw a silver grey sports car. But what Luo An didn't expect was that there were several cars speeding behind this sports car. Not only that, the people in the cars behind also took out guns and pulled the trigger at the sports car. Bang bang bang, the silver grey sports car moved left and right on the mountain road and dodged in a hurry. Luo An saw that this group of people were getting closer and closer to him, and his face suddenly became extremely ugly. Son of eating. This time was not enough to start the Porsche and run away. In order to go to a high-end restaurant tonight, he didn't bring a gun. Luo An had to grab Mona and hide behind the Porsche. Just as he pinned Mona down, a silver grey sports car whizzed past on the road in front of Luo An. The sports car was so fast that Luo An could not see the specific face of the other person, but he saw 2 people in the sports car, both men. After the sports car left here, 5 cars rushed to catch up like lightning, leaving a sky full of smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Damn it. What is going on? Mona, who was pinned down by Luo An, struggled to raise her head and cursed at the dusty red dress. This dress was her most expensive one. "Don't move. Get down." The next second, Mona's head was pinned down by Luo An again, because after the 5 cars drove away, there was another black car of the same model behind. Not only that, the people in this car raised their rifles and pulled the trigger towards the Porsche. Bang bang bang. I at %%. Luo An's face suddenly became extremely angry when he heard the sound of bullets hitting the Porsche. However, the angrier he got, the calmer Luo An became. Porsche was a good car, but it couldn't withstand bullets, so he hurriedly took Mona to retreat to a rock further behind. Boom. As soon as the 2 moved behind the rock, the Porsche suddenly exploded and turned into a big fireball. Not only that, the black car slowly stopped by the roadside, and 2 guys wearing masks and holding rifles walked towards this direction. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271 Luo An, I just bought a new car. This is a new car I just bought. Looking at the rising flames in front of him, Luo An's face was full of anger, and his eyes began to turn blood red little by little. As soon as Mona, who was hiding behind Luo An, raised her head, several bullets came at her. She quickly lowered her head to avoid them. Cold sweat dripped down Mona's forehead, and she cursed in annoyance. "Fuck. I should have brought a gun to dinner tonight." Mona felt her heart was about to jump out of her throat. At the critical moment, she subconsciously looked at Luo An. "Luo An, what should we do?" "Hide well and follow my orders." At this time, Luo An's heart was full of murderous intent. After answering Mona without any emotional fluctuations, he picked up a few stones from the ground and handed them to Mona. "When you hear me talking, throw stones at the enemy's position." "What?" Luo An's words made Mona confused, but at the critical moment she did not raise her own questions, but pulled Luo An's tie on his chest and kissed him hard on the mouth, with a flash of determination in her eyes. "If you die, I will accompany you. Don't worry, we won't die tonight." Luo An laughed, then turned around quickly, and the smile on his face disappeared instantly, replaced by chilling indifference. The two stood back to back, and Luo An took out a bottle of swift potion, a bottle of painkiller and a bottle of hemostatic potion from a place where Mona could not see them, and poured them into his stomach. Then, Luo An's mind moved slightly, and he turned on the emotional perception in his mind, and then two cold and malicious feelings came from behind the stone. Although he could not see the other party hiding behind the stone, Luo An, who clearly perceived the position of the two people on the opposite side through malicious perception, raised his mouth slightly. "Sure enough, I knew that this emotional perception has other uses." The plan of pretending to surrender and looking for an opportunity was cancelled, and he was ready to directly surpass God. At this time, one of the guys wearing a mask and with abundant hair took the lead and slowly walked towards the side of the big stone with a gun. He made a tactical gesture, and after his teammates nodded, he planned to move behind the stone with the other party and shoot. At this moment, Luo An suddenly shouted loudly, "Stone!" The sudden shout startled the hairy guy. Luo An, who had already discovered the opponent's position through emotional perception, rushed out suddenly and moved in front of him quickly like a ghost. The hairy guy was obviously very experienced in combat. The moment he saw Luo An appear, he pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. But Luo An's speed was faster than he thought, and Luo An, who had already discovered the opponent's position in advance, stretched out his hand to push the muzzle away, and his other hand had already clamped the enemy's neck. The hairy guy's pupils shrank suddenly, and then he heard a familiar sound in his ears. Snap. Instead of letting the enemy's body fall, he held it in front of him, and at the same time, raised the M401 snatched from the opponent's hand, and turned to the remaining enemy. On the other side, when Mona heard Luo An's shout, she threw a few stones in her hand to the opposite side of the big stone without hesitation. The sudden shouting and a few rocks also scared the guy wearing a mask and attracted his attention. On the other side, Roan had quickly killed his teammates. Shit. The guy wearing a mask was shocked when he saw this and hurriedly turned the muzzle of the rifle in his hand from the big rock to Roan. But unfortunately, Roan was faster than him and pulled the trigger before him. Bang 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 bang. This time Roan did not follow the habit of 2 shots to the chest and 1 shot to the head, but emptied the magazine of the M401 with a cold face. The gunshots soon ended, and there was another masked corpse on the ground that the forensic doctor would scratch his head when he saw it. "Roan, you are too." Mona, who did not see Roan's specific movements, but saw the 2 corpses, covered her mouth and exclaimed. Her heart was surging, her eyes were red, and the strong suspension bridge effect between life and death made Mona wet in other places. "Don't move. Keep hiding behind the rocks." Before she finished her words, Luo An shouted, picked up another M401 from the rotten meat on the ground, and continued to run towards the car, parked on the side of the road. Seeing Luo An's back running away like a hungry wolf, Mona's face changed, because they had just hidden behind the rocks, and didn't see how many enemies were in the car. On the other side, Luo An was not panicked at all, because when he turned on his emotional perception, he found that in addition to the two enemies, there was another enemy left in the driver's seat of the car. Simply thinking about it from another perspective, Luo An had guessed the general situation of the whole incident. This group of people chased the two guys driving the sports car with guns for some reason, and happened to meet a pair of young men who were hunting on the mountain road on the way, so they chose to kill them without hesitation. It was not difficult for such well-trained people to kill two people, so they only left the last car, and for the sake of insurance, they also got two people off. But what they didn't expect was that the ordinary men and women hunting in the wild suddenly became more terrifying than them and killed them. Luo An's process of killing the enemy was actually very fast, and it only took a few seconds, including the time it took to empty the magazine. This made the guy in the black car feel like he just took a nap and found that he was the only one left in the original 3-person team. Motherfucker. Seeing Luo An snatching his teammate's weapon and running towards him with an M4A1, the driver's face changed drastically, and he hurriedly pulled out a gun from his feet and fired wildly at the passenger seat. But the next second, the driver's eyes were suddenly filled with shock and horror. Because when the driver lowered his head to find the gun, Luo An's body burst out with a terrifying force. His legs suddenly burst out with force. His ears whistled against the wind, and the whole person moved, like lightning, to a place less than 2 meters away from the car. When the driver fired at the passenger seat, Luo An had already moved to the side of the black car. Fuke, what kind of monster is this? The driver felt his scalp tingling a little. He gritted his teeth, quickly changed the new magazine, and prepared to try to kill the opponent again, but there was no enemy in his sight. The other party ran to him. The driver realized that he was in big trouble. His tactical training over the years told him that the best way to deal with an enemy he couldn't defeat was to avoid him, so the driver didn't hesitate and immediately threw down his gun and prepared to drive away. It was just an ordinary mission. There was not much money, so there was no need to risk his life. Bang. Crash. The next second, the glass of the black car's driver's seat was suddenly shattered, and a hand suddenly stretched out from the outside and grabbed the driver's chest. Shit. The driver was frightened and hurriedly stepped on the accelerator, but a huge force suddenly burst out from his chest. The driver's eyes widened, and he found that he was actually dragged out of the car. Luo An dragged the driver out of the car, threw him heavily on the ground, and then raised his foot and kicked the driver's stomach hard, causing the driver to roll on the ground for several circles. Holding the stolen M4A1, Luo An slowly walked towards the driver, who was holding his stomach and sweating. His eyes were red, his face was as cold as ice, and his voice was also extremely cold. Tell me, motherfucker, who are you? Chapter 272, calling to clean up the scene. On a highway in the mountains near Los Angeles, a Porsche was burning with flames. Luo An turned his back to the flames with a cold face, holding the stolen M4A1 and staring at the driver in front of him. The middle-aged white male driver cursed the temporary captain, who asked their team to kill Luo An and Mona. They are just a couple who came out to play in the wild. They have no intention of provoking us. Why should we provoke them? Now, both teammates were killed by them, and his head was pointed at by a gun. Thinking of the scene of being dragged out of the car by Luo An just now, the driver's face turned red and white. If he was lucky enough to survive today, he would shoot the temporary captain for the rest of his life. Seeing the male driver's face changing, Luo An loaded the M4A1 with a click and asked directly, "Say it or not?" "Say it." "I'll say it." The driver covered his aching stomach and shouted, "My name is Henry. I'm a mercenary." On the other side, Mona came from behind the big rock, holding a pistol she found from the enemy. At this time, her face was also very ugly. In addition to the life and death crisis just now, another important reason was that the red dress she was wearing had many cuts at this time. "This is my most expensive piece of clothing." Walking to the driver's side, Mona raised her foot and kicked the driver's back hard, holding up the pistol, and asked sternly, "Why attack us?" %at. Being kicked by high heels is not pleasant. The driver cursed the temporary captain again in his heart and replied with a distorted face, "It was just an accident." The reason the driver explained was similar to Luo An's previous guess. That is, when the other party was chasing the sports car, they saw Luo An and Mona saw this scene, so they planned to kill them. After listening to the driver's explanation, Mona kicked the driver hard again. Luo An continued to ask, "Who is in the sports car? Why are you chasing them?" "I don't know." Luo An pushed the rifle in his hand hard, and the driver hurriedly shouted, "Sorry, I didn't lie to you. I really don't know." The driver said that they were just a temporary team, and only the temporary captain knew the specific details of the mission. They only knew to kill that person, and what that face looked like. Really cautious. Luo An sneered, selectively ignored the driver's plea for mercy, raised the butt of the gun, and knocked him unconscious. Mona next to him saw the mess of her red dress, and became more and more angry, and kicked the driver hard again. Turning around and seeing the still burning portion of the two bodies on the ground, Mona reached out, and tore off a piece of cloth from her red dress. While fixing her hair, she asked, "Roan, what should we do next? This is my new Porsche. We can't just let this go." Roan put the M401 on his back, saying that he had to get the money back from the mercenaries or the guy driving the sports car, otherwise he wouldn't be able to sleep well in the future. He took out his cell phone and called the FBI in Los Angeles, asking them to send someone to clean up the scene. Then Roan thought about it and called Lassie again. The call was quickly connected. Before Luo An could speak, Lassie's exclamation came from the other end of the phone. "Luo An, the public security here in Los Angeles is really too bad. There are actually a group of people openly racing on the road and shooting and killing others in the middle of the night. The public security here is really not very good." Hearing the sound of police cars in the background of Lassie's words, Luo An's mouth twitched, and he briefly described what he and Mona had just experienced, and finally said, "Take over time temporarily, Lassie. You immediately follow up and see what is going on tonight." Okay. Lassie learned that Luo An and Mona were almost killed, and immediately accepted the order without any nonsense. After making an appointment with the female companion next time, Lassie got a brand new motorcycle from somewhere, put on a helmet and quickly followed the route of the sports car. At this time, the entire western part of Los Angeles was full of police bells, and many roads were in chaos. Racing in a sports car at night is not a big deal, but it is unreasonable to have a group of armed gangsters openly shooting and killing people. So a group of LAPD, Los Angeles Police, went out to surround this group of lawless guys. Several of the higher-ranking LAPD even called the FBI, because if they were not mistaken, the gangsters seemed to have rocket launchers in their hands. Standing on the mountain road, Luo An and Mona could vaguely see the chaotic fire in the distance. The two thought that the FBI in Los Angeles would send someone soon, but it was not until more than 40 minutes later that 4 FBI agents arrived. These 4 agents were still acquaintances of Luo An and Mona, that is, several agents from the 2nd investigation team. The leader was Agent IV, Chapter 227. Mona was a little surprised to see that there were only 4 people coming, while Luo An narrowed his eyes and silently made a note of this account in his heart. You know, although Luo An and the other 2 have not officially started working in the FBI Los Angeles branch, their organization and identity information have been transferred to the internal system of the FBI Los Angeles branch. Luo An's identity is still a deputy director of the investigation team who is temporarily acting as the captain. When a deputy director of the investigation team was attacked, the FBI actually sent only a few people, and it took so long. What does this mean? This means that either someone in the FBI Los Angeles branch headquarters building has said hello, or when the other side sent people here, these agents were stopped by others. Very good. Looking at the back of Mona who was beginning to greet IV, Luo An slowly showed a warm smile on his face. Before this, he didn't know who his enemies were, but once this incident happened tonight, Luo An would know who the enemies were. On the other side, the 4 agents were a little surprised when they saw the scene here. Then, after Mona said that she and Luo An did not carry guns, but Luo An killed 3 people single-handedly, the 4 agents looked at Luo An with shock in their eyes. Agent Ivy from the 2nd investigation team was also dumbfounded. She subconsciously turned her eyes to Luo An and saw Luo An waving at her with a smile on his face. However, there was a pile of rotten meat not far from his feet. Agent Ivy shuddered violently. In the previous bomb incident, Ivy saw that Luo An was a ruthless person at heart, but seeing this scene now, Ivy found that she had underestimated him. Several agents began to deal with the scene silently, and they all looked at Luo An with some admiration. Luo An didn't care. After the scene was almost cleaned up, he walked to Agent Ivy and asked with a smile, "Thank you for your hard work. By the way, why did the FBI Los Angeles branch building send you here? Cleaning the floor, dealing with the scene is not the job of the investigation team's agents." Well, actually, it wasn't a notice from the branch building, but team leader Owen who asked us to come. Ivy tilted her head and thought about it, and didn't hide it, and whispered. There was a little friction in downtown Los Angeles, and several investigation teams went there to check the situation. When the branch building issued a notice that you needed manpower to handle the scene, the leader of the number 4 investigation team said that downtown Los Angeles needed more manpower, so your situation was put on the back. Oh, the leader of the number 4 investigation team. Hearing this, Luo An's smile became even brighter. Ivy, can you tell me the name of the leader of the number 4 investigation team? Chapter 273. Luo An, Lassie, you came at the right time. Morton, York. Seeing the smile on Roan's face, Agent Ivy's mind suddenly popped up the shredded meat. She subconsciously took a step back and replied, the number 4 investigation team has the highest rate of solving cases. The team leader Morton York has worked in the FBI Los Angeles branch for a long time and has a lot of experience. Roan's eyes flashed with enlightenment. A lot of experience means that he knows a lot of people in the FBI Los Angeles branch. It is not difficult to put a small trip on himself. Thank you, Evie. You're welcome. Agent Ivy and the other 2 drove the 2 bodies. The other 2 drove the black and grey Porsche, and Roan and Mona escorted the driver and drove the black car with a missing window. During this time, Roan and the other 2 returned to the hotel where they lived and changed clothes alternately. While sitting in the car waiting for Mona and the guard driver, Roan's cell phone in his pocket suddenly rang. After pressing the answer button, Luo An asked, Lassie, how is the situation over there? Are you injured? Don't worry, I'm fine. Lassie on the other end of the phone sounded a little gloating, saying that she had just watched an immersive movie on the streets of Los Angeles. On the brightly lit streets of Los Angeles, a silver grey sports car was speeding left and right in a hail of bullets, and several black cars behind it were chasing it with guns raised and firing, and behind the black car was a group of LAPD police cars with harsh noises. As time went by, the distance between the silver grey sports car and the black car was getting closer and closer. Just when everyone thought that the 2 people in the sports car were going to die on the spot, several new cars suddenly appeared on the road. This group of new guys directly inserted themselves between the black car and the sports car, and violently collided and exchanged fire with several black cars, and the situation on the streets of Los Angeles suddenly became more chaotic. In order to avoid being accidentally injured, the LAPD and the FBI group quickly hid and called for SWAT support. The chaos didn't last long. The new forces had more intense firepower. 4 of the 5 black cars were quickly destroyed, and only 1 realized something was wrong and ran away. After the black car ran away, the new forces also quickly broke up and disappeared. When the LAPD and the FBI finally entered the battlefield, they were left with only a few strange-looking cars and a lot of corpses. At this point, Lassie was amazed. Roan, these groups of people are obviously not ordinary people. The head of the investigation team led by the FBI immediately sent SWAT team members to completely block the nearby area, but from his expression, it seems that no one has been caught. Roan raised his eyebrows and asked, where is the sports car? The sports car has also disappeared. Lassie stood on the side of the road, looking at the angry head of the FBI investigation team not far away, and smiled, then turned and left here and whispered, but I took a few photos of the 2 people in the sports car during the chaos. Although the picture quality is not very clear, I can barely see their faces clearly. Well done, Lassie. Roan asked Lassie to go to the FBI Los Angeles headquarters quickly. He wanted to see who turned his newly bought Porsche into a fireball. The other party must pay this money. The headquarters of the FBI Los Angeles branch, located in West Los Angeles, is a square building with a solemn appearance. Across the street to the southwest of the building is a veterans hospital, and not far to the east is a museum. It is less than 20 minutes drive from Beverly Hills, and only 30 minutes to Hollywood. Holding the key to the Special Investigation Team's exclusive office area given to them by the team leader Potent Burn, Roan and Mona escorted the driver and took the elevator to the 11th floor of the branch building. Then at the end of the corridor, they saw a large office area with a wide view and plenty of moonlight, but it was covered with dust, with only a few broken tables and chairs, and no professional equipment. At the door of the office area, Mona, holding a notebook in her arms, was silent for a few seconds, and turned to look at Roan silently. Roan felt a little toothache. He didn't think much about the money before, but now that he had the case funds in his hands, Roan suddenly understood how Augustus felt at the time. When thinking of Augustus, Roan remembered the brand new equipment of the number 5 investigation team. I really want to bring them all here. Several thoughts flashed through his mind. Luo An's mouth corners slightly raised, turned around and grabbed the driver from Mona's hand, then smiled and said to Mona, "Everything is difficult at the beginning, but it will get better later. I hope so." He opened the iron door for the temporary detention of prisoners and threw the driver in, selectively ignoring the driver's protest against the dust all over the floor. Luo An shook the interrogation record in his hand and saw Mona getting water to clean the room, and hurriedly said, "Mona, the office area does not need to be cleaned. This office area is very large, and there are a lot of sundries and garbage. If Luo An and Mona are alone, it will definitely take a long time." Mona was a little confused. If we don't clean the office area, how can we handle the case next? A team leader's office is enough. Anyway, there are only 3 of us now. Luo An laughed, took the tools from Mona's hand, pushed open the door of the team leader's office and walked in. Then the two found that the team leader's office was cleaner. At least there were some shabby desks in the office area outside, but the team leader's office was unobstructed. Except for dust, there was only dust and dust. Roan's expression remained unchanged. He picked up the tools and began to clean up the team leader's office. Mona, who was following behind him, sighed, picked up the tools, and started cleaning up as well, and asked, "So, after we arrive in Los Angeles, we still have to buy desks ourselves?" "No." Roan glanced through the window at the black car he had just driven in, and smiled. "Someone will deliver desks to us. Maybe we don't need to buy computers or anything." Mona looked back in confusion, and just as she was about to ask, Lass's voice suddenly came from outside. "Roan." "Mona, did I go to the wrong place? Or did I come at the wrong time? What's going on here?" "No, you came at the right time." Roan opened the door of the team leader's office, and saw Lass's eyes light up. He hurriedly asked, "Thank you for your hard work tonight. Lassie, where are the photos? I postponed a date tonight. You must compensate me with a special Mexican chicken burrito tomorrow." Lassie took out a mobile phone from her pocket and handed it to Roan. There were more than a dozen photos in it. The picture quality was indeed not very clear, but the faces of the 2 people in the sports car could be barely seen. "Mona, it's up to you now." Handing the phone to Mona, Luo An asked her to try to check the identities of the 2 people, and then stuffed the cleaning tools in his hand into Lass's hand. "Lassie?" Seeing the expression on Lass's face, Luo An grinned. "The sanitation of the team leader's office is in your hands. I'm going to do something, and we'll be back soon." After that, without waiting for Lassie to answer, Luo An took the interrogation record and left here quickly. Seeing Luo An's figure disappear in an instant, Lass's mouth twitched, and she turned her eyes to Mona, and found that Mona raised the laptop in her hand, and handed another cleaning tool to herself, with a beautiful smile on her face. "Come on." Lassie looked up at the tools in her hands and was speechless. "My future life will not be ruined by this couple." Just as Lassie began to clean up the team leader's office, several SUVs slowly drove into the parking lot. The white man in the lead got out of the car and frowned when he saw the black car in the parking lot. That was the same model as the one on the streets of Los Angeles. He turned around and asked sternly, "What's the matter with this car?" Chapter 274 Investigation Team Number 4 begins to snatch people. The FBI Los Angeles branch building. The middle-aged white man with a serious face and a group of people following behind him is the leader of the 4th investigation team, Morton York. When Roan reported it before, he did not say too much details, only saying that he and Mona encountered an attack and needed to deal with the scene. So the leader of the 4th investigation team, Morton York, only knew the difficulties that Roan and his team encountered, but did not know that the people who caused them to fall into crisis were the same group of people who were racing and chasing people on the streets of Los Angeles. When the gunfight broke out on the streets of Los Angeles, Morton York had already contacted SWAT and LAPD to carry out a comprehensive blockade of the surrounding area. But unfortunately, after the gunfight, they did not catch anyone, but only harvested a lot of bodies. Morton York had already sent people to investigate the identities of these bodies, but the dead are not as good as the living. After learning in the parking lot that Roan and Mona had captured an accomplice of the street shooting, Morton York waved his hand and led everyone into the elevator. Go to the special investigation team. At the end of the 11th floor of the branch building, in the team leader's office, Lassie was cleaning the room with tools. There were a few drops of sweat on her forehead and a few black marks on her face from dust. Mona next to her also took tools to clean up with her. The 2 photos taken by Lassie were from good angles. She had already finished the investigation of the 2 people. The team leader's office was not big, and there was no garbage in the room. The 2 of them quickly cleaned it up. What is Roan doing? Why hasn't he come back yet? As she walked out with the tools, Mona complained in a low voice, then turned around and asked, Lassie, have you rented a house for the next few months? Do you need help? I've got it all done. Lassie rubbed the black marks on her face with her hand, and her expression was very proud. She said that she rented a big house not far from here. The landlord was a woman, and she was a small Hollywood actress. The landlord had a nice motorcycle, but she hadn't ridden it for a long time because of work, so Lassie spent 2 hours to successfully persuade the other party to lend her the motorcycle. And the other party also gave her a very handsome black and red motorcycle suit. 2 hours? Mona was a little speechless, but she was not interested in the details. After showing off proudly, Lassie asked in a low voice, so, you and Luo An are living together again this time? Yes. Mona immediately explained, this time we are sharing the rent. Luo An and I each have a room. Lassie raised her eyebrows when she heard this. Properly keep some freshness? Yes. Mona nodded, saying that men are fickle, and leaving a little distant and private space will help maintain the emotional balance between the 2. Lassie, who was the team most of the time, put on her role and nodded in agreement. You're right. If you're too familiar with each other, it will soon be boring. Mona. The 2 women quickly whispered to each other, but not long after, the door of the office area was suddenly pushed open, and then a group of men in suits walked in. Lassie subconsciously put her hand on the pistol at her waist and asked loudly, who are you? This is the newly established special investigation team. Morton York looked around the dirty and messy environment with a blank expression, and the faces of the agents behind him showed a few disdainful faces, which made Lassie and Mona frown. I'm Morton York, the leader of the 4th investigation team. After saying his identity in a stiff tone, Morton York said directly, thank you for catching the driver. I will report this matter for you later. After that, Morton York waved his hand, and 4 agents immediately walked out from behind him and strode towards the room where the driver was temporarily detained. Damn it. Fouquet. Lassie and Mona's expressions changed immediately when they saw the other party's actions. They immediately rushed to the 4 people and raised their hands to stop them. Seeing that the other party was going to force their way through regardless of the 2 of them, Lassie immediately shouted angrily, and Mona took out a pistol from her waist with anger in her eyes. Stop right there. This driver not only represents Mona's red dress and Roan's Porsche, but also represents the face of their special investigation team. If this is robbed in front of them, there is no need to think about how the people in this building will look at the special investigation team tomorrow. Morton York's eyebrows moved slightly when he saw Mona's actions, but his expression did not change. The 4 agents who were about to rob people were shocked at first, but they were relieved when they saw that their team leader was calm. The leading guy chuckled, ladies, stop making trouble. Anyway, you haven't finished cleaning the house yet. We will help you deal with this person. No need to thank me. Thank you %*. Lassie cursed loudly when she heard this and took out a pistol from her waist. Why, you dare to shoot? The leading agent smiled even more and stretched out his hand to knock down the pistols in Lassie and Mona's hands. Mona and Lassie's faces changed. They really didn't dare to shoot, but if they didn't shoot, they couldn't fight the 4 people on the opposite side. Just when Mona gritted her teeth and prepared to take a vacation later, if it really didn't work, and wait for her father to come to Los Angeles, a very disdainful voice suddenly came from behind everyone. It turns out that the number 4 investigation team's number 1 crime solving rate was obtained by bullying other investigation teams and snatching people from other investigation teams. I finally understand what the saying internship is for experts and outsiders are for amateurs means. Hearing this voice, the ugly expressions on Mona and Lassie's faces disappeared immediately, and they breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Morton York, the leader of the 4th investigation team, turned around and found that the person who was speaking was a very young and handsome young man. The person who came was Luo An. Morton York had just said one word, and Luo An, who had just entered the office area and closed the door, raised his foot and kicked the nearest guy in front of him in the popliteal fossa. The agent knelt on the ground before he could react. Luo An pulled up the guy's arm and hit the other man's lower abdomen hard. Then, like a ghost, he knocked all 5 agents behind Morton York to the ground in a few seconds. Not only that, Roan also took off the pistols on them, threw most of them far away, and left one on the head of the agent who had just spoken rudely to Lassie and Mona, and asked with a smile, "Come on, guess now whether I dare to shoot." The 5 agents lying on the ground looked at Roan with shock, and seeing Roan knock down his teammates so easily, the leading agent was horrified, and Morton York was also moved. Morton York had indeed heard that Roan, the deputy team leader, was extraordinary, but he didn't expect his actions to be so sharp. Morton York glared at his men on the ground and said in a deep voice, "Roan Greenwood, you." Before Morton York finished speaking, Roan raised his pistol and knocked hard on the forehead of the lead agent and asked loudly, "I'm asking you a question. Did you hear me? Do you think I dare to shoot? Answer me." Seeing the cold light in Roan's eyes, the lead agent's mouth trembled, and his face trembled, and Morton York's face darkened instantly. Roan was not questioning the lead agent, he was clearly asking him. Chapter 275 Luo An, just tell me if you have any requests. I promise not to agree. The special investigation team's office was unusually quiet at this time, and everyone's eyes were on Luo An holding a gun and the lead agent who had a gun pointed at his head. Morton York, the leader of the number 4 investigation team, said with a dark face, "Roan Greenwood, you." As soon as the other party opened his mouth again, Roan interrupted him again and asked the leading agent again, "Answer my question." Morton York's mouth twitched. "Roan Greenwood, you." Roan continued to shout at the leading agent, "Answer my question." After repeating it several times, Morton York's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and even a fool understood what was going on. So the leading agent swallowed his saliva and said hurriedly, "You won't shoot." Roan narrowed his eyes. "Are you sure?" The leading agent's calves were shaking. "I'm sure." Roan just stared at the leading agent's eyes quietly. The agents of the number 4 investigation team watched this scene anxiously. Lassie and Mona clasped their hands together, wanting to persuade Roan, but now they didn't dare to speak. Time passed by minute, and finally Morton York lost his temper and said, "Roan Greenwood, you." As soon as Morton York opened his mouth, Roan interrupted him with a grin, put away his gun, and patted the lead agent on the shoulder. "Just a joke. Of course I won't shoot. We are all FBI. How can I shoot and kill my colleagues? Right?" Morton York's face turned from black to dark purple. Deliberate. This Roan Greenwood did it on purpose. Feeling the pistol above his head disappear, and hearing what Roan said, the lead agent was relieved. Opening his mouth, the lead agent was about to speak. Roan grabbed his arm, and grabbed him under his body, and then kicked him hard to the ground. The leading agent wanted to cry, but had no tears after his facial features came into close contact with the ground. Luo An ignored him and put the other 3 agents to the ground. Then he turned around and stretched out his hand to Morton York. "Hello, Team Leader Morton York. I have heard of you for a long time. I wonder why you came to our special investigation team today. If you need any help, just tell me. I promise I will agree to nothing." Hearing Luo An's words, Lassie couldn't help but burst out laughing and then quickly raised her hand to cover her mouth. Moan looked at Luo An with amusement and suddenly found that she liked Luo An's naughty look. When Morton York heard Luo An's words, his face suddenly changed from dark purple to normal color because he took a deep breath and forced himself to suppress the anger in his heart. Roan Greenwood, I've heard of your name for a long time. Reaching out his hand and shaking Roan's, Morton York said in a low voice, you beat up my detective from the 4th investigation team like this. Aren't you afraid that your superior will punish you afterwards? Beat? What beating? Roan spread his hands, his face full of confusion. Why didn't I see it? Everyone saw Roan's actions just now. Morton York's eyes widened, not understanding how Roan dared to lie with his eyes open. But just as he was about to ask a question, he suddenly discovered something. That is, because there has been no investigation team stationed in this office area, there is no surveillance installed at all. Not only that, if he went back to report that his 9 agents were knocked to the ground by the other party alone, then Morton York's 4th investigation team would be famous in this building. Thinking back to the fact that Luo An had deliberately closed the door when he entered the office area before, Morton York looked at Luo An in front of him and laughed. Luo An Greenwood, you are very good. I underestimated you before. No, I underestimated you before. Team leader Morton York. Luo An said that he had never encountered an incident in New York before where an investigation team went to another investigation team to rob people. He didn't expect that as soon as he came to Los Angeles, Chief Morton York would let him see a new world. It was really an eye-opener. Humph. Morton York snorted coldly, looked at Luo An and the other 2 carefully, and turned around to leave with his men. At this moment, Luo An suddenly called out to the other party, wait a minute. Team leader Morton York. Morton York turned his head, his eyes full of anger. What else do you want? How can you say this from a man like you? Luo An seemed not to see the anger in Morton York's eyes, and smiled and stretched out his hand to hug the other party's shoulders. But he didn't hug. Morton York took a step back to avoid Roan's arm. Roan didn't care and continued, I know you want the driver. I can give him to you. We have no use for him anyway. Lassie, who was standing next to him, immediately tensed up and was about to speak, but Mona quickly reached out and pulled her back. Mona knew Roan better, and he never made a loss. Morton York narrowed his eyes, thought for a few seconds, then turned to Roan and asked, what do you want? Morton York could see that Roan Greenwood was a little fox, and he was ruthless, shameless, and thick-skinned. Morton York thought back to the people he had met over the years, and found that Roan was one of the best among so many people. He was obviously a man who could do great things. After all, those successful bosses and big men had no shame. How could such a little fox do such a thankless task? With a quick glance around the office area, where there was nothing but dust and broken tables and chairs, Morton York immediately guessed what Roan was thinking. As expected, Luo An replied, I need everything in this office area. A driver, in exchange for 10 desks, 10 computers, and you guys to clean up the garbage in the office area for us. You just beat up one of my agents, and now you want to ask me for so many things? Morton York was angry and laughed again. Just a driver, it's not worth these. Hey, this is the only accomplice who survived the street gunfight in Los Angeles. Luo An spread his hands, with an expression on his face, that you have made a fortune if you rely on this guy to catch that group of enemies and then solve the case. Your investigation team number 4 will make a fortune. You have gained nothing today. What will you say if the major media in Los Angeles come to ask tomorrow? Media? Luo An nodded. Of course. Maybe the news will be leaked to me accidentally. Seeing the matter-of-fact expression on Luo An's face, Morton York's mouth twitched, thinking that this case was so big that the senior officials of various departments would definitely come to inquire about it tomorrow. Morton York hesitated for a few seconds and chose to take this loss temporarily. 4 desks, 4 computers, 9 desks, 9 computers. The 2 bargained for a while and finally agreed on 6 desks and 6 computers. The detectives of the 4th investigation team would help clean up the office area. When the things were in place, Luo An would hand the people over to the other party. Morton York had worked in the Los Angeles branch for many years, and the 4th investigation team had a strong foundation. After just a few hours, he had prepared these things for Luo An and the other two, and the office area was also cleaned up. Goodbye, come often in the future. Luo An stood at the door of the office area and waved a handkerchief. The leading detective who was escorting the driver felt very annoyed. In the newly renovated office, Mona laughed at Luo An, while Lassie frowned slightly. Luo An, hand the driver over to the other party. Are we going to ignore this case? How is that possible? Luo An stretched his body, took out a piece of paper from his arms, and handed it to Lassie, grinning. People are not important, clues are the most important. Lassie took the paper and began to check it. Luo An turned to look at Mona. What are the identities of the two people driving the sports car? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.